I should have stayed at the damn McDonald's fryer in Denver. At least there, the worst thing that could happen was a grease burn or an angry customer. Not, whatever the hell is out there. My name is Zachary Reese Turner. Everyone calls me Zach, and I'm 24 years old. I've been working at McDonald's in Denver for the past 3 years, saving up for community college while living in a cramped apartment with 2 roommates. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was predictable, safe. That was until my buddy Elias suggested we take his Toyota RAV4 on a road trip to Houston during my week of vacation time. He had a cousin there who told us about an amazing camping spot just outside the city. Said it was secluded, peaceful, a hidden gem most tourists didn't know about. What a load of crap that turned out to be. The trip started normal enough. We packed Elias's SUV with all the camping gear we could fit: tent, sleeping bags, a cooler full of beer, and enough snacks to last us the 4-day journey. I was excited to escape Denver's familiar streets and the monotonous rhythm of flipping burgers. The open road beckoned with promise, a brief respite from the fluorescent lights and greasy air of my everyday existence. We took turns driving, blasting music, and talking about everything and nothing. It felt good to be young and carefree, even if just for a little while. Neither of us could have predicted the disturbing turn our adventure would take. 3 days into our journey, we crossed into Texas. The landscape gradually transformed around us, Colorado's mountains giving way to flat expanses that seemed to stretch into infinity. There's something eerie about Texas highways at dusk, the way the sun bleeds red across the horizon, casting long shadows that dance alongside your vehicle. Elias's cousin Marcus called as we approached Houston, giving us directions to the campsite. It's about 40 minutes outside the city, he explained. Perfect spot. No rangers checking permits, no crowds of weekenders. Just pure nature. In retrospect, I should have questioned why such a supposedly perfect spot was so empty. Houston itself was a maze of concrete and lights, nothing like Denver's more navigable grid. We stopped at a gas station on the outskirts to fuel up and grab some last-minute supplies. The attendant, an older man with deeply lined skin and yellowing teeth, gave us a strange look when Elias mentioned where we were headed. Pine Hollow? Ain't been nobody camping out there in years, he said, his Texan drawl thick as molasses. Not since them disappearances back in '09. When we pressed him for details, he just shook his head and mumbled something about local superstitions. We laughed it off. Just some small-town ghost story meant to spook outsiders, we figured. God, I wish we had taken his warning seriously. As we left the city behind, the paved roads gave way to gravel, then to dirt tracks barely visible in our headlights. The trees grew denser, creating a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Our phones lost signal one by one, the bars disappearing just as Elias was trying to confirm the directions with his cousin. It's fine, he assured me, tapping the SUV's dashboard confidently. I saved the location. Should be just a couple more miles down this road. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches scraping against the windows like fingernails. The cheerful mood that had carried us across state lines had evaporated, replaced by an inexplicable tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We finally reached a small clearing that matched Marcus's description, a flat area surrounded by pine trees, with what looked like the remains of old fire pits scattered about. It was nearly midnight by then, and the forest was alive with sounds. Crickets chirping, leaves rustling, the occasional hoot of an owl. Nothing sinister, just nature doing its thing. Yet something felt off. Maybe it was the unnatural stillness of the air, or the way the trees seemed to lean inward, as if watching us. Home sweet home, Elias joked, but his voice lacked conviction. We set up our tent by the SUV's headlights, too tired to properly explore our surroundings. The ground beneath my sleeping bag felt oddly lumpy, but I was too exhausted to care. As I drifted off to sleep, I could have sworn I heard whispers just beyond the thin fabric of our tent, soft, urgent murmurings in a language I couldn't understand. I woke up to Elias shaking my shoulder roughly. "Zach, wake up, man. Something's wrong." It was still dark outside, though a faint grayish light suggested dawn wasn't far off. "What time is it?" I mumbled, disoriented and groggy. "Almost 5, he replied, his voice tight with anxiety. "But that's not the problem. The SUV's been moved." I sat up, suddenly alert. "What do you mean, moved?" Elias ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit I'd noticed during our years of friendship. "I mean, someone drove it about 20 feet, and parked it facing the opposite direction. The keys are still in my jeans pocket. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "That's impossible," I said, even as my mind raced through increasingly scary explanations. "Maybe you're mistaken about where we parked it?" But we both knew he wasn't. Someone, or something, had moved our only means of escape. The realization that we weren't alone hit me like a physical blow. We'd driven miles from the nearest sign of civilization to a supposedly abandoned campsite, yet someone had been close enough to touch our vehicle while we slept just feet away. The implications were terrifying. "We need to leave," I whispered, already stuffing my sleeping bag into its sack. Elias nodded, his face pale in the dim light filtering through the tent. "I'll check the SUV, make sure it still runs." As he unzipped the tent flap, I grabbed his arm. "Be careful," I said, the words feeling inadequate against the dread pooling in my stomach. He gave me a tight smile and slipped outside. I heard his footsteps crunching across the clearing, then the sound of the driver's door opening. There was a moment of silence, followed by a strangled cry that turned my blood to ice. "Zach, you need to see this." I scrambled out of the tent, nearly tripping over the stakes in my haste. The pre-dawn air was thick with fog, obscuring the edges of our campsite. Elias stood by the open driver's door of the SUV, his face ashen. As I approached, I saw what had caused his distress. Muddy handprints covered the steering wheel and dashboard, some small like a child's, others large and misshapen. But worst of all was what had been drawn on the fogged-up windshield, a crude map, with an X marking what I assumed was our location, and a circle around an area deeper in the forest. "What the actual hell?" I whispered, my breath visible in the cold morning air. Elias shook his head, speechless for once in his life. We debated our options while packing up the campsite in record time. The smart move was obvious. Get in the SUV and drive back to Houston as fast as possible. Forget this creepy forest and whatever lunatic was playing games with us. "The engine starts fine," Elias said, turning the key in the ignition. The familiar rumble was reassuring, but only briefly. When he tried to back up, the SUV made a horrible grinding sound. "Shit, something's wrong." He popped the hood, and we both stared blankly at the engine, neither of us knowing enough about cars to identify the problem. That's when we noticed several components had been clearly tampered with. Wires disconnected, parts removed. "Can you fix it?" I asked, knowing the answer before he spoke. "Not without replacement parts," he admitted, slamming the hood down in frustration. With the SUV effectively disabled, we were faced with a disturbing decision. Try to hike back to civilization or wait and hope someone would come looking for us. "Marcus knows where we are," Elias reasoned, though his voice lacked conviction. "If we don't check in by tonight, he'll send help." I wasn't so sure. The cousin had seemed flaky during our brief interaction, and we weren't exactly on a strict schedule. My phone still showed no signal, and Elias's battery had died overnight. "I think we should start walking," I argued, gesturing toward the dirt road. "It can't be more than 15 miles back to the highway." But Elias pointed at the strange map on the windshield. "What if that's showing us a way out? A shortcut?" I stared at him incredulously. "Are you serious?" Following directions from some psycho who broke into our car. Our argument was cut short by a sound that made us both freeze. A child's laughter, high and clear, coming from somewhere in the forest. We spun around, scanning the trees, but saw nothing in the mist. "Hello," Elias called out, his voice echoing strangely. No response, just the rustling of leaves in the gentle morning breeze. "Kids don't just wander around forests alone," I muttered, more to reassure myself than anything. "Must be a family camping nearby." Even as I said it, I knew it was unlikely. We'd seen no other vehicles on the way in, no signs of other campsites. The laughter came again, closer this time, followed by what sounded like a woman humming a lullaby. The hairs on my arms stood on end. "We need to get out of here," Elias said, voicing what we both felt. But as we turned back to the SUV, planning to grab our backpacks and start hiking, we saw something that stopped us cold. A trail of small footprints in the mud, leading directly to our tent. With growing horror, I watched as Elias slowly approached the tent and unzipped it. My sleeping bag was exactly where I'd left it, but now something was nestled inside. A small, handmade doll, crafted from twigs bound together with what looked like human hair. Attached to it was a scrap of paper with a message scrawled in childish handwriting. follow US or stay forever. I felt sick, my McDonald's training on dealing with difficult situations suddenly laughably inadequate for whatever this was. Someone's messing with us, Elias insisted, his voice cracking slightly. Probably local kids who get their kicks scaring campers. But we both knew this was something more sinister. The level of coordination, the disabled SUV, the timing of it all. This was no childish prank. Against my better judgment, we decided to follow the map on the windshield. The way back to the highway meant hours of walking on unfamiliar roads, potentially passing whoever was terrorizing us. The map, at least, offered some direction, and the circle it marked was only a couple of miles into the forest according to Elias's estimation. Maybe it's another campsite, he suggested hopefully, with people who can help us. I doubted it, but nodded anyway, shouldering my backpack and making sure my pocket knife was easily accessible. As we set off along a narrow trail that seemed to match the one on the map, I couldn't shake the feeling we were making a catastrophic mistake. The forest felt alive around us, watching our every move, the trees creaking despite the lack of wind. We'd been walking for about 30 minutes when we found the first sign, a small cairn of stones with another twig doll balanced on top. "We're on the right track, I guess," Elias said, attempting a smile that came out more like a grimace. I remained silent, focusing on controlling my increasingly ragged breathing. The path was becoming harder to follow, overgrown in places, with roots that seemed to deliberately trip us. The fog hadn't lifted. If anything, it had grown thicker, limiting visibility to just a few yards ahead. We passed more cairns, each one adorned with increasingly elaborate dolls. Some had crude faces drawn on them. Others were scraps of fabric that looked disturbingly like pieces of clothing we'd packed in our bags. "They've been through our stuff," I whispered, the implications making my skin crawl. Who could have had that much time with our belongings without us noticing? The trees eventually thinned, and we emerged into another clearing, larger than the one where we'd camped. In the center stood the burnt-out shell of what looked like an old cabin, its blackened beams jutting up like ribs from a carcass. The ground around it was charred, suggesting the fire had happened long ago, but nothing had grown back. No grass, no underbrush, just bare, black earth. "I don't like this," I said, stating the obvious as we cautiously approached the ruins. That's when we noticed the walls were covered in photographs, dozens of them, weathered and faded but still recognizable. They showed people camping, hiking, smiling for the camera, and in the background of each one, barely perceptible unless you were looking for it, was a figure watching from the trees. A tall, emaciated silhouette with unnaturally long limbs. As I stared at the photos, a realization hit me like a physical blow. One of them showed our campsite from last night, with Elias and me setting up our tent, unaware of what lurked just beyond the light of our headlamps. The silence in the clearing was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind through the trees. Just our ragged breathing and pounding hearts. "We need to go? Now," I whispered, unable to tear my eyes away from the photo of us. It couldn't be possible. It had only been taken last night, yet here it was, weathered like all the others. Elias reached out with trembling fingers and touched the image. The paper crumbled under his touch, releasing a cloud of ash that made us both stumble back, coughing. But behind where the photo had been was something worse. A crude drawing of two stick figures running from a much larger figure, its limbs elongated to impossible proportions. "Someone's just trying to scare us," Elias said for what felt like the 100th time, but his voice had lost all conviction. I was about to respond when we heard it, a wet, slithering sound from inside the burnt cabin. We both froze, eyes locked on the doorless entrance, a gaping black maw in the charred structure. Something moved in that darkness, not quickly, but with deliberate slowness, like it was savoring our fear. I caught a glimpse of pale, elongated fingers wrapping around the edge of the door frame, impossibly thin and jointed in all the wrong places. My body screamed at me to run, but I was paralyzed, watching as those fingers, 5, 6, 7 of them, tightened their grip on the wood, which began to splinter under the pressure. Elias broke first, grabbing my arm with enough force to bruise. "Run," he yelled, yanking me backward. The spell broken, I turned and sprinted alongside him, back toward the trail we'd followed. Behind us, something emerged from the cabin. I didn't see it clearly, just a peripheral impression of something tall and wrong unfolding itself from the doorway. A sound followed us, not quite a roar, not quite a scream, but something between the two that resonated at a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The forest that had seemed so threatening before now offered our only hope of escape, and we crashed through undergrowth, no longer following any path, just desperate to put distance between ourselves and whatever had been in that cabin. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing behind a fallen tree that offered minimal cover. What the actual hell was that? Elias gasped between desperate gulps of air. I shook my head, unable to form words, my mind still trying to process what I'd glimpsed. Nothing human moved like that, had fingers like that. The rational part of my brain searched for explanations, a deformed person, an elaborate costume, some kind of projection or hallucination caused by gas leaking from the ground. But deep down, I knew we were facing something that defied rational explanation. Something that had been hunting in these woods for years, if those photographs were any indication. As our breathing slowed and the immediate panic subsided, I became aware of our surroundings. The fog had lifted somewhat, but I had no idea which direction led back to our campsite. The sun was hidden behind thick cloud cover, offering no navigational help. Do you have any idea where we are? I asked Elias, keeping my voice low. He shook his head, pulling out his phone out of habit, then sighing at the black screen. We need to get back to the SUV, he said. Even if it won't start, at least we have supplies there. And it's our only reference point. I nodded, though the thought of returning anywhere near that burnt cabin filled me with dread. Which way did we come from? I asked, scanning the forest. Every direction looked the same. Endless trees, their trunks so similar they seemed to repeat like a glitch in reality. We picked a direction that felt right and started walking, trying to move quietly while keeping watch for any signs of pursuit. The forest had come alive again with ambient sounds, the rustle of leaves, distant bird calls, the occasional snap of a twig that made us both jump. After about 20 minutes, Elias stopped abruptly, raising a hand to signal silence. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. At first, I heard nothing unusual, then it registered. Children's voices, laughing and singing somewhere ahead of us. Not just one child, but several, their voices overlapping in a dissonant chorus that somehow sounded both joyful and deeply wrong. "It's coming from that direction," Elias pointed, his expression conflicted. "Could be other campers," I suggested without much hope. "Or it could be whatever's been messing with us, trying to lure us in," he countered. We cautiously moved toward the sound, ducking behind trees and moving as silently as our city-bred instincts allowed. The voices grew louder, more distinct. I could almost make out the words to their song, something about the tall man and playing forever. A cold sweat broke out across my skin despite the cool air. Finally, we reached the edge of yet another clearing and peered through the undergrowth. What we saw defied explanation. 5 or 6 children, ranging in age from maybe 6 to 12, were dancing in a circle. Their clothes were filthy and outdated, the kind of outfits you'd see in photographs from the 1950s or 60s. But most disturbing was their appearance. Their skin was gray and desiccated, stretched tight over visible bones. Their eyes were sunken dark hollows, their mouths too wide, splitting their faces in unnatural grins. They weren't children, not anymore. Whatever they were moving with jerky, puppet-like motions, their limbs bending at impossible angles as they circled what looked like a freshly dug pit in the center of the clearing. I must have made a sound, a gasp or whimper that escaped before I could stop it. The children stopped their dance abruptly, heads swiveling in unison to stare directly at our hiding place. Their mouths opened simultaneously, but the voice that emerged came from all of them at once, a discordant chorus that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my skull. "Come play with us, Zachary Reese-Turner. The tall man is hungry again." The sound of my full name from their withered lips sent a jolt of pure terror through me. How could they possibly know who I was? Beside me, Elias was trembling violently, his eyes wide with horror. "We need to go," he mouthed, already backing away. But it was too late. The children smiled wider, their jaws unhinging like snakes, and as one, they began to move toward us with unnatural speed, their limbs blurring as they closed the distance. Pure instinct took over. I grabbed Elias by his jacket and yanked him to his feet. "Run!" I screamed, no longer caring about stealth or direction. Only escape mattered now. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us, the children's laughter grew louder, seemingly coming from all directions at once. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. They weren't running but moving in a terrible, skittering fashion, some on all fours like animals, others leaping from tree to tree with impossible agility. Their movements were all wrong, joints bending backward, heads rotating too far, limbs elongating to cross distances that should have been impossible. "They're hurting us," Elias gasped as we veered away from one child only to find another blocking our new path. He was right. They weren't trying to catch us, but driving us in a specific direction. Knowing this should have helped, should have given us some strategic advantage, but panic had overtaken rational thought. My legs burned, my lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass, but the adrenaline kept me moving. We broke through a dense patch of trees and found ourselves back at the burnt cabin clearing. "No, no, no," I moaned, realizing too late what the children had been doing. They had driven us in a circle, back to where the tall man waited. And it was waiting, standing beside the cabin, its height impossible to reconcile with human proportions. It must have been 12 feet tall, its limbs accounting for most of that height, arms that reached nearly to the ground, legs bent like a spider's. Its body was emaciated, ribs visible through taut, grayish skin, but its face. God, its face was the worst part. Not because it was monstrous, but because it was almost human, gaunt and elongated, with eyes too large and too dark, set in hollow sockets. Its mouth was a lipless slash that split into a grin as it saw us, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Jesus Christ," Elias whimpered beside me, his voice barely audible. The tall man took a step forward, its movement fluid despite its awkward proportions, covering an impossible distance with that single stride. In that moment, I thought of my life back in Denver, the monotonous job at McDonald's, the cramped apartment, the delayed dreams of community college. It had seemed so limiting then, so suffocating. Now I would have given anything to be back there, safe among the mundane problems of normal life. The tall man reached out one grotesquely elongated hand toward us, fingers splaying like the legs of a starfish. Behind us, the children had formed a semicircle, blocking retreat. We were trapped. Then Elias did something I never expected. He charged directly at the nearest child, shouldering it aside with desperate strength. "Come on," he yelled, and I followed without hesitation, barging through the gap he'd created. The child he'd hit made a sound no human throat could produce, a high, keening wail that modulated into something like radio static. The others responded, their chorus of distorted voices rising in what sounded like anger. We sprinted through the trees, no longer trying to be quiet or careful, just running blind. I became aware of a rhythmic thumping behind us, heavy footfalls that shook the ground. The tall man was pursuing. Each impact seemed closer than the last, gaining despite our frantic pace. "There!" Elias suddenly shouted, pointing ahead. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of something familiar, the dull glint of metal. Our SUV. Somehow, we'd found our way back to the campsite. Hope surged through me, giving my exhausted legs new strength. If we could reach the SUV, maybe we could get it started, maybe the damage had been an illusion, a trick to keep us from trying to leave. The vehicle represented safety, normality, escape. We burst from the tree line into the clearing where we'd camped, making straight for the SUV. I yanked open the passenger door while Elias circled to the driver's side. "Please start, please start," I chanted under my breath as he jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed once, twice, and roared to life. "Yes," Elias shouted, slamming the gearshift into reverse. I looked out the window, and my elation died instantly. The tall man stood at the edge of the clearing, its unnaturally long arms hanging by its sides. It wasn't pursuing anymore. It was watching, and somehow, that was more terrifying than the chase had been. Elias had the SUV moving now, spinning it around to face the dirt road that would lead us back to civilization. As we accelerated away, I kept my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The tall man remained motionless, But the children had emerged from the forest to stand beside it, their small hands raised in what almost looked like a farewell. "We're going to make it," Elias said, his voice cracking with relief as the campsite receded behind us. I wanted to believe him, but something felt wrong. The escape had been too easy after all that pursuit. The dirt road stretched ahead, familiar from our drive-in. We passed landmarks I recognized: a lightning-struck tree, a rocky outcropping, a small stream crossing. We were going to make it. We were actually going to escape this nightmare. That's when I noticed the smell, subtle at first, then increasingly acrid. Smoke, coming from somewhere in the SUV. "Do you smell that?" I asked, scanning the dashboard for warning lights. Elias nodded grimly, pressing harder on the accelerator. "Something's burning. We just need to make it to the highway." But the smoke was thickening, filling the cabin, making us cough. A warning light flashed on the dashboard. The engine was overheating. "No, no, no," Elias muttered, pounding the steering wheel in frustration. The SUV began to shudder, the engine making an ominous knocking sound. We'd gone perhaps 2 miles from the campsite when the vehicle gave a final, violent jerk and died, coasting to a stop in the middle of the dirt road. Elias tried the ignition again and again, but nothing happened, not even a click. It was as if the electrical system had been completely fried. We sat in silence for a moment, the implications sinking in. The SUV hadn't been repaired. It had been sabotaged in a way that would let us get just far enough to think we'd escaped before breaking down completely. "They planned this," I whispered, my mouth dry with fear. "They wanted us to feel hope before they took it away." Elias didn't respond, just stared straight ahead through the windshield. I followed his gaze and felt my blood freeze. Standing in the middle of the road, perhaps 50 yards ahead of us, was the tall man. It was impossible. We'd left it behind at the campsite, and we'd been driving for several minutes. It couldn't have gotten ahead of us. Yet there it stood, motionless except for a slight tilting of its head, as if curious about what we would do next. "We have to run for it," Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The highway can't be more than a few miles away." I nodded numbly, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure blocking our path. Running meant going around it, getting close enough for those impossibly long arms to reach out and grab us. But staying in the disabled SUV meant certain death. We both knew that now. This thing, whatever it was, had been toying with us from the beginning. The photographs in the burnt cabin told the story clearly enough. We weren't the first to fall into its trap, and we wouldn't be the last unless we could somehow break the pattern. We quietly gathered what we could from the SUV: a flashlight, Elias's multi-tool, a half-empty water bottle, and my pocket knife. The forest stretched on either side of the dirt road, thick and uninviting, but offering our only chance at circumventing the tall man. "We'll go through the trees," I whispered, pointing to the right side. "Try to circle around and get back to the road further down." Elias nodded, his face pale but determined. We eased the doors open, wincing at every creak, and slipped out into the oppressive silence of the forest. The tall man hadn't moved, its elongated silhouette remaining perfectly still in the middle of the road. But I could feel it watching us, even though I couldn't clearly see its eyes from this distance. The moment we stepped into the treeline, the atmosphere changed. The air became thick, difficult to breathe, as if the oxygen content had suddenly dropped. Sounds dampened, creating an eerie pocket of silence around us. We moved as quickly as we dared, trying to maintain a parallel course to the road while staying hidden among the trees. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 minutes, Elias grabbed my arm and pointed. Through the trees, we could see the dirt road again, and it was empty. No sign of the tall man. "I think we made it past," he whispered, hope creeping into his voice for the first time in hours. I wasn't convinced but nodded anyway. We needed something to keep us going. We had just started to move toward the road when a child's voice rang out behind us. "That's cheating." We spun around to find one of the gray children standing just a few feet away, its unnaturally wide smile splitting its desiccated face. Before we could react, it opened its mouth and emitted that same high-pitched static sound we'd heard earlier. An answering chorus rose from all around us. We were surrounded. "Run!" I shouted, abandoning any pretense of stealth. We burst from the trees onto the road, sprinting with the last reserves of our energy. Ahead, I could see a bend in the road, and beyond that, could it be? The distant gleam of sunlight on metal guardrails. The highway. Hope surged through me, lending speed to my exhausted legs. We were going to make it. We were actually going to escape this nightmare. But as we rounded the bend, that hope shattered like glass. The road didn't lead to a highway. It led back to the burnt cabin clearing. Somehow, impossibly, we'd been running in a circle again. The tall man stood waiting, surrounded by its grotesque children, their faces split in identical grins of anticipation. No, Elias moaned beside me, dropping to his knees in defeat. It's not possible. We were going straight. We never turned around. I helped him up, my mind racing. It's manipulating the forest somehow, I said, the realization hitting me with terrible clarity. Bending space, changing the paths. We can't trust what we see. As if in response to my words, the forest around us began to ripple and distort, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Trees shifted position, paths disappeared and reformed, the very landscape rearranging itself before our eyes. The tall man took a step toward us, covering an impossible distance, suddenly much closer than it had been seconds before. Its mouth opened wider than any human mouth could, revealing rows of needle-like teeth descending deep into its throat. The children skittered forward, moving in that horrible, wrong way, their limbs contorting as they closed in from all sides. We were trapped in a nightmare that defied the laws of reality, with no escape route and no hope of rescue. In that moment of absolute despair, I had a sudden, desperate idea. The photos, I gasped, grabbing Elias's arm. Everyone in those photos was trying to escape. What if that's the trap? What if it feeds on our fear, our desperation? Understanding dawned in Elias's eyes. Without a word, we turned to face the tall man directly. Instead of running, we took a step toward it. The thing paused, its head tilting in apparent confusion. The children faltered in their approach, exchanging glances with two wide eyes. We took another step forward, then another. "We see you," I called out, my voice stronger than I felt. "We understand what you are, and we're not afraid." It was a lie. I was terrified beyond reason. But something told me intention mattered more than truth here. The tall man let out a sound. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream, but something that vibrated at a frequency that made my vision blur and my ears ring. The children began to flicker like bad television reception, their forms becoming unstable. The forest around us shuddered, reality itself seeming to protest our defiance of the established pattern. We continued walking forward, directly toward the tall man, each step requiring monumental effort against the instinct to flee. Its form began to waver like the children's, stretches of its gray skin becoming transparent, revealing nothing but darkness underneath. The burnt cabin behind it started to collapse, not from physical damage, but as if the very concept of its existence was being erased. When we were just a few feet from the tall man, close enough to smell the ancient, musty odor emanating from it, Elias pulled out his lighter, a small act of defiance, a tiny flame against the overwhelming darkness. "We reject you," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "We deny your reality." I joined in, pulling out my phone and turning on its flashlight function. The combined light wasn't much, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. The tall man recoiled, its form becoming increasingly unstable. The children's chorus rose to a painful screech, their bodies elongating and contracting in impossible ways before they simply winked out of existence, like candles being snuffed. The tall man made one final, desperate lunge toward us, its two long fingers stretching for our throats. We held our ground, our pathetic lights pointed directly at its face. It shuddered, convulsed, and then collapsed in on itself like a black hole, leaving nothing but a momentary distortion in the air where it had stood. And then we were standing on the side of a highway, cars whizzing past at 70 miles per hour. The transition was so abrupt that we both staggered, nearly falling into traffic. A horn blared as a semi swerved to avoid us. Behind us was a normal forest. No burnt cabin, no clearing, just Texas pines swaying gently in the afternoon breeze. We stood there in shock, our minds struggling to process what had happened. Had we imagined it all? Was it some kind of shared hallucination? But the scratches on our arms from running through undergrowth were real. The mud caked on our shoes was real. The terror still coursing through our systems was real. A state trooper pulled over within minutes. probably concerned about two disheveled men standing dazed by a highway. When we told him we'd gotten lost hiking and our vehicle had broken down, he seemed skeptical but offered to drive us to the nearest town. As we climbed into his cruiser, I asked casually about Pine Hollow campsite. His expression changed immediately. "That place has been closed to the public for decades," he said, eyeing us in the rearview mirror. "Not since the mass disappearances back in the 60s. Some sick bastard lured families there. Whole campsites of people vanished without a trace. They never found the bodies." Elias and I exchanged looks, but said nothing more. What could we say? That we'd encountered something that preyed on campers, something that existed outside the normal rules of reality? That would have earned us a trip to the psychiatric ward, not back to Houston. We never did recover the SUV. When we described where we'd left it, park rangers found nothing but an empty stretch of dirt road, already being reclaimed by the forest. Marcus, Elias's cousin, swore he'd never told us about any campsite called Pine Hollow. In fact, he seemed genuinely confused when we mentioned it, claiming he hadn't spoken to Elias in months. We eventually made our way back to Denver, though neither of us has been the same since. I still work at McDonald's, still live in that cramped apartment, but I no longer find my life monotonous or limiting. I'm grateful for every boring shift, every mundane interaction, every normal day that passes without the rules of reality being bent around me. Sometimes at night, I wake up convinced I can hear children singing somewhere in the distance, their voices distorted into that static-like chorus. And in the corner of my eye, I occasionally glimpse something tall and wrong, watching me from just beyond the edge of perception. But it never approaches, never reaches for me with those impossibly long fingers. Maybe our denial of it, our rejection of its reality, did something permanent. Or maybe it's just waiting, patient as the forest itself, for me to go camping again. God, why'd I ever think this was a good idea? That's the thought that keeps looping in my head now, stuck out here in the middle of nowhere, with the humidity clinging to my skin like a bad dream I can't shake. My name's Juniper Faye Calloway, 32 years old, born and raised in Austin, Texas. I clean houses for a living, scrubbing toilets, wiping down counters, and dealing with rich folks who don't even look me in the eye. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, and I've gotten pretty damn good at it. I drive a beat-up Ford F-150, a 2012 model I've nicknamed Rusty, 'cause, well, it's rustier than an old nail. This trip was supposed to be my escape, a chance to breathe after months of elbow grease and bleach fumes. I'd been itching to get out of Austin for a while. The city's great, tacos, live music, all that, but it's loud, and lately, it's felt like the walls were closing in. I've always loved the idea of camping. You know, just me in the open air, no one else's mess to clean up. So, I saved up a little, packed my truck with a tent, some cheap gear from Walmart, and a cooler full of Shinerbach and hot dogs. Houston seemed like a decent spot, close enough for a weekend, far enough to feel like I was breaking free. Plus, I'd heard about this spot near Sam Houston National Forest, all quiet and tucked away. Sounded perfect. The drive out was fine, just me and the radio, singing along to some old Willie Nelson tunes. I've got this thing where I talk to myself when I'm alone. Keeps me sane, I guess. "Juniper, you're gonna love this," I said, grinning like an idiot as I passed those big Houston billboards. I'd spent the week before scrubbing this fancy lawyer's place in Austin. Marble floors, chandeliers, the works, and all I could think was how I'd rather be anywhere else. Now here I was, free as a bird, truck rumbling down I-45, the skyline fading in my rear view. It felt good, real good. I got to the forest edge around dusk, the sky turning this deep orange that made everything look kinda dreamy. I found a little pull-off near Lake Conroe, not too far from the main road, but hidden enough to feel private. I'm no pro at this camping stuff. I mean, I've watched a couple YouTube videos on pitching a tent, but that's it. Still, I managed to get it up without too much swearing. I cracked a beer, sat on the tailgate, and just listened to the crickets. It was peaceful, like the world finally shut up for once. I even laughed to myself, thinking how my boss would freak if she saw me out here instead of mopping floors. The air was thick, though. Houston's got that swampy vibe, and I could feel the sweat sticking my shirt to my back. I'm used to heat, but this was something else. I kept wiping my forehead, telling myself it was just part of the adventure. I'd brought a little battery-powered fan, one of those dinky ones you clip to a table, and set it up in the tent. Luxury camping, I joked out loud, sipping my beer. The woods were alive with little noises, bugs, birds, the rustle of leaves. It was nice, but I couldn't shake this tiny itch in my gut, like maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to that feeling. I mean, I clean houses, right? I'm good at spotting when something's off, dust in the corners, a stain that doesn't belong. But out here, I figured it was just me being paranoid. I'd been cooped up too long, that's all. So, I finished my beer, tossed the can in my trash bag, can't stand litter, and started unpacking my sleeping bag. The stars were popping out, bright even with Houston's glow in the distance. It was gorgeous, like something out of a movie. I didn't know it yet, but that beauty was hiding something scary as hell. I decided to take a quick walk around before bed, just to stretch my legs. The truck's headlights lit up the trees as I grabbed my flashlight. Not some fancy one, just a cheapo from the gas station. I wandered a bit, kicking pine needles, feeling like a kid again. I've always liked being on my own. It's why I don't mind the cleaning gig. No small talk, just me and my thoughts. But as I looped back toward the campsite, I caught this whiff, something sharp, like wet metal or old meat. Probably just an animal, I muttered, shrugging it off. I wasn't wrong, but I wasn't right either. By the time I crawled into my tent, I was beat. The fan hummed, barely cutting through the muggy air, and I lay there staring at the nylon ceiling. I thought about texting my buddy back in Austin, maybe sending a pic of the setup, but there was no signal out here. Figures. I rolled over, closed my eyes, and tried to sleep. That's when I realized the crickets had stopped. Just gone. Silent. I didn't think much of it then, but man, I should have. That quiet was the first sign something disturbing was creeping closer. So there I was, lying in my tent, wondering why the hell the crickets decided to clock out for the night. I'm not some nature expert. Most of my days are spent scrubbing tile grout, not decoding forest sounds. But even I knew that wasn't normal. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and flicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, bouncing off the tent walls, and I told myself, Juniper, you're just tired. Chill out. But that itch in my gut? It was back, stronger now, like when you walk into a client's house and smell something funky under the bleach. I couldn't ignore it. I unzipped the tent flap, poked my head out, and scanned the campsite. The truck sat there, all quiet and hulking, its rusty edges glinting in the moonlight. Everything looked fine, cooler still closed, trash bag tied up, no bears or whatever sneaking around. Still, I grabbed my boots, slipped them on over my socks, and stepped outside. The air hit me like a wet towel, thick and warm, and I swear it carried that weird smell again. Sharp, metallic, wrong. Maybe a raccoon dragged something nasty nearby. I mumbled, trying to laugh it off. Didn't work. I figured a quick check around would settle my nerves. I'm practical like that. Years of cleaning houses taught me you don't just sit there when something's off. You find it and fix it. So, I walked the perimeter, flashlight in hand, shining it into the trees. The woods were still, too still, like they were holding their breath. I kicked a rock, watched it skitter into the brush, and muttered, see? Nothing scary here. But then I saw it. Tire tracks, fresh ones, cutting through the dirt about 20 yards from my spot. Not mine. My truck's tires are worn smooth. These had deep treads. Now, I'm not saying I freaked out right then, but my heart did this little stutter thing. I crouched down, ran my fingers over the tracks, and tried to think straight. Could have been a ranger, right? Or some other camper passing through. Except this wasn't a main trail, just a random pull-off I'd picked for the solitude. I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and decided to head back to the tent. You're overthinking it, Juniper, I said, forcing a grin. Too many late-night horror flicks. Still, I locked the truck doors, never mind that I was sleeping outside. Back in the tent, I couldn't shake the feeling those tracks meant trouble. I lay there, fan buzzing, and started second-guessing this whole trip. I mean, I clean houses. I'm not cut out for some disturbing wilderness mystery. I thought about packing up and heading back to Austin right then, just flooring it down I-45 till I hit familiar streets. But it was late, I was beat, and honestly, I didn't want to admit I was spooked. Tough it out, I told myself. One night won't kill you. Famous last words, huh? The next morning hit me like a slap. Humid, bright, and loud with birds again. I crawled out, stretched, and brewed some instant coffee over my little camp stove. The daylight made everything feel less creepy, you know? Like how a messy room looks fine once you turn the lights on. I sipped my coffee, burnt my tongue, and decided to explore a bit. Maybe find a trail, take some pics. I grabbed my backpack, locked the truck, and headed toward the lake. That's when I noticed the trash bag I'd tied up last night was ripped open, hot dog wrappers scattered everywhere. I cursed under my breath. Raccoons, probably, though it didn't look like their usual mess. No paw prints, just torn plastic and meat gone. I cleaned it up, stuffed the scraps back in a new bag, and tied it tighter this time. "Gotta outsmart you little bastards," I said, half laughing. But as I stood there, something caught my eye. A glint in the trees, quick and sharp, like sunlight off glass. I squinted, stepped closer, and saw it again. Binoculars? A camera? My stomach dropped. "Hello," I called out, voice cracking a little. No answer, just the wind. I stood there, frozen, trying to decide what to do. Yell again? Run back to the truck? Pretend I didn't see it? I'm not some tough guy. I once hid in a client's pantry when their dog barked at me, but I wasn't about to let this ruin my trip. So, I took a deep breath, adjusted my backpack, and kept walking toward the lake, acting like I wasn't rattled. Big mistake, looking back. That glint wasn't some hiker's gear. It was the first real sign something horror show level was watching me, and I'd just turned my back on it. Morning by Lake Conroe started off okay. Sun shining, water lapping at the shore, me trying to pretend I wasn't still freaked about that glint in the trees. I'm Juniper Faye Calloway. Remember, the house cleaner from Austin who thought a solo camping trip near Houston was her ticket to peace. Yeah, right. I was snapping pics with my phone, crouching by the water to get a good shot of some ducks, when I heard it, a low, guttural grunt, like a hog with a cold. I froze, mid-snap, and told myself, chill, it's just wildlife. Except it didn't feel like that. I stood up slow, scanning the tree line, my heart doing that annoying thump-thump thing again. The grunt came again, closer this time, from the direction I'd walked in. I grabbed a stick, not much of a weapon, but it felt better than nothing, and started backing toward the path. "Hey, whoever's out there, I'm just passing through," I called, trying to sound tough. No response, just that grunt, and then a snap, like a branch breaking under something heavy. My brain flashed to every scary movie I'd ever seen, and I wished I'd stayed home scrubbing floors. I picked up the pace, stick in one hand, phone in the other, glancing over my shoulder every 2 seconds. The trail was narrow, all pine needles and roots, and I kept tripping like some horror story klutz. That's when I saw it. Movement, quick and low, darting between the trees. Not a deer, not a hog. Too big, too deliberate. My stomach flipped, and I muttered, "Oh, hell no. I've cleaned up some nasty stuff, moldy fridges, pet stains, but this was a whole new level of disturbing." I broke into a jog, aiming for the truck. Halfway back, I stopped dead. There, smack in the middle of the path, was a pile of bones, small ones, picked clean, still wet with something dark. Rabbit, maybe? I'm no CSI, but I know fresh kill when I see it. And this wasn't raccoon work. My hands shook as I snapped a pic, thinking maybe I'd need proof later. "What the hell's going on out here?" I whispered, backing away. That grunt came again, loud now, and I swear it echoed, like there was more than one. I turned and ran, stick forgotten, legs burning. I burst into the campsite, panting, and there was my truck, safe and sound, or so I thought. The driver's side window was cracked, a spiderweb of glass around a fist-sized hole. "You've got to be kidding me," I groaned, circling the truck. Nothing stolen, but the lock was popped. Someone, or something, had been here. I checked the tent next, still standing, but my cooler was tipped over, beer cans punctured and leaking into the dirt. This wasn't random. This felt personal, like whatever was out there was toying with me. I grabbed my keys from my pocket, hands sweaty, and climbed into the truck. Locked the doors, started the engine. Thank God it turned over. I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to think. Drive back to Houston? Call for help? No signal. Of course, middle of nowhere, right? That's when I saw them. 3 figures, tall and hunched, stepping out from the trees about 50 yards off. Not people, not quite. Their arms were too long, their heads too still. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but they didn't vanish. "This isn't happening," I said, voice shaking. But it was. They didn't move fast, just stood there, watching. I could feel their eyes, even from that distance, boring into me. My skin crawled, like when you walk into a client's basement and know something's dead down there. I threw the truck into reverse, ready to peel out, but then one of them lifted something, a long, jagged blade, glinting in the sun. My mouth went dry. This wasn't some prank or wild animal. This was horror, straight up, and I'd stumbled right into it. I hit the gas, tires spinning in the dirt. The truck lurched back, and I swung it around, kicking up dust. Those things, whatever they were, started moving, slow at first, like they knew I couldn't get far. I glanced in the rear view, saw them closing in, and floored it down the pull-off toward the main road. My heart was hammering, my brain screaming, "Get out! Get out! Get out!" I didn't know what they were, crazy locals, mutants, something worse, but I knew one thing. I wasn't sticking around to find out. The terror was real now, and it was chasing me. I'm barreling down that dirt pull-off in my truck, tires kicking up gravel like it's the last race of my life. And hell, it might be. Juniper Faye Calloway, that's me, 32, house cleaner from Austin, and right now I'm wishing I'd stuck to mopping floors instead of playing camper near Houston. Those things, those freaky, long-armed shadows with their damn blade, were still in my rear view, loping after me like they had all the time in the world. My hands were slick on the wheel, sweat dripping into my eyes, and I kept muttering, "You're fine, you're fine," even though I wasn't. This was life and death scary, no question. The truck hit the main road, some potholed stretch of asphalt near Sam Houston National Forest, and I swerved hard, nearly clipping a tree. The engine roared, old Rusty giving me everything she had, and I thanked every saint I don't believe in that she didn't stall. I glanced back. Those figures were still there, fading into the dust, but not giving up. "What are you?" I yelled, like they'd answer. My phone was useless, no bars, so I couldn't call 911 or even my buddy in Austin to say, "Hey, if I die, water my plants." I was on my own, and it hit me hard. This was real danger. The road twisted, trees blurring past, and I kept the pedal down, pushing 70 on a stretch meant for 40. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it over the engine, and my mind raced with every horror story I'd ever heard. Was this some Texas Chainsaw kind of deal? Cult weirdos? I once cleaned a house with a creepy taxidermy room, stuffed deer staring at me, but this was next level disturbing. I swerved again, dodging a fallen branch, and the truck fishtailed. "Stay with me, girl," I begged, patting the dash like it'd help. Then I heard it, a thunk, loud and sharp, right behind me. I yelped, ducked my head, and checked the mirror. Something had hit the tailgate, a rock, maybe, or worse. One of those things was closer now, close enough I could see its face, or where a face should have been. Just a blank stretch of skin, no eyes, no mouth, like a mannequin gone wrong. My stomach lurched, and I screamed, "Nope, nope, nope." I've scrubbed toilets after frat parties, but that sight? Pure nightmare fuel. I floored it harder, praying the truck wouldn't blow a tire. The road straightened out, and I spotted a sign. Huntsville, 15 miles. Civilization, thank God. I figured if I could hit town, I'd be safe. Cops, people, lights. But then the truck started shaking, a nasty grind coming from the engine. "Oh, come on," I groaned, smacking the wheel. Smoke trickled from under the hood, and I knew I was screwed. I'd pushed her too hard. Ahead, there was a gas station, closed, of course, because my luck's just that good, but it had a lot. I swung in, tires squealing, and killed the engine, hoping to hide. I crouched low in the cab, peeking over the dash. The station was dark, pumps rusted, windows boarded up, like something out of a ghost town. I held my breath, watching the road. Minutes dragged by, and then I saw them. Those figures, moving slow, spreading out like they were searching. One stopped, turned that blank face toward the lot, and I swear it knew I was there. My hands shook as I fumbled for my flashlight. Useless against them, but it felt like something. This was it, a real life or death moment, and I had no plan. I slid down further, heart jackhammering, and started thinking fast. Run for it. Fight. I'm not some action hero. I once cried when a client yelled at me for missing a spot, but I wasn't ready to die out here. The truck was toast, smoke still curling up, so I'd have to move on foot. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed my keys and phone inside, and cracked the door. The air hit me, thick and sour, and I heard that grunt again, closer now. They were coming, and I had seconds to decide: bolt into the woods or try for the station's back door. I took a deep breath, whispered, "You've got this, Juniper," and made my move. I slid out, keeping low, and darted toward the station, legs pumping like never before. The gravel crunched under my boots, too loud, and I heard a shuffle behind me, those things picking up speed. I reached the building, slammed against the wall, and spotted a rusted door around back. My fingers scrabbled at the handle, slick with panic, and it gave, just barely. I slipped inside, pulled it shut, and braced myself against it, praying they hadn't seen me. But deep down, I knew they had. So there I was, pressed against that rusted door in the abandoned gas station, my back slick with sweat and my breath coming in ragged gasps. Juniper Faye Calloway, 32, house cleaner from Austin, now hiding from some faceless horrors near Houston like I'd stumbled into a damn nightmare. The truck was dead out front, smoking like a bad barbecue, and those things, those blank-faced freaks, were out there, hunting me. I could hear their grunts through the thin walls, low and guttural, and I knew I'd made a deadly mistake thinking I could outrun them. This wasn't just scary anymore. This was endgame. The inside of the station was a wreck: dusty shelves, broken glass, a counter with a busted register. I clutched my flashlight, its weak beam shaking in my hand, and crept deeper in, looking for anything: a weapon, a phone, a miracle. My boots crunched on something, old candy wrappers, maybe, and I winced, every sound feeling like a beacon. "Keep it together," I whispered, like that'd help. I've cleaned some nasty places, hoarder houses, flood-damaged basements, but this place had a vibe that made my skin crawl, like death had moved in and never left. I found a back room, some kind of storage closet, and ducked inside. There was a metal shelf, rusted but heavy, so I shoved it against the door, grunting as it scraped the floor. My arms burned. I'm used to lifting mops, not furniture, but it bought me a second to think. I rummaged through my backpack, hands trembling, and pulled out my phone. Still no signal, but the flashlight app was brighter than my cheapo one. I swept it around and spotted a trapdoor in the corner, half hidden under a pile of moldy boxes. "Basement," I muttered. "Great, 'cause this isn't horror movie enough." I hesitated. Big mistake. The front door rattled, a slow, deliberate thud, like those things were testing it. My heart jumped into my throat, and I scrambled to the trapdoor, yanking it open. A waft of damp, sour air hit me, and I gagged. Smelled like a client's fridge I once cleaned after a power outage. Stairs led down, rickety and dark, but it was that or face those freaks head on. I'm no fighter. Hell, I once ran from a spider, but I wasn't dying up here. I climbed down, pulling the door shut behind me, and prayed they wouldn't follow. The basement was tight, all concrete and cobwebs, with a single bulb flickering overhead. I crouched low, listening. The thud stopped, replaced by a scraping, like claws on metal. My mind raced. Were they in? I spotted a pipe wrench on the floor, heavy and cold, and grabbed it. "Better than nothing," I said, gripping it tight. Then I saw it. A smear of red on the wall, fresh, streaking down like someone had dragged a hand. My stomach flipped. This wasn't just a hideout. Someone else had been here, and they hadn't made it out. The trapdoor creaked above me, and I bit my lip to keep from screaming. A shadow stretched across the stairs, long, warped, wrong. One of those things was coming down, blade in hand, and I realized I'd trapped myself. "Stupid, stupid, stupid," I hissed, backing into the corner. I swung the wrench up, ready to fight, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. The figure hit the bottom step, blank face tilting toward me, and I saw the blade wasn't clean. Dark stains coated it, fresh and wet. This was it, a tragedy I'd walked right into. I lunged, swinging wild, and the wrench connected, clang, against its arm. It didn't flinch, just grabbed my wrist with a grip like ice and twisted. I yelped, dropping the wrench, and kicked at its legs, but it was like kicking a tree. The blade rose, glinting in that flickering light, and I thought of Austin, my shitty apartment, my plants, the tacos I'd never eat again. I'd screwed up, thinking I could handle this alone, and now it was over. The last thing I felt was the cold edge against my neck, and the last thing I thought was, should have stayed home. Darkness took me, quick and final. Upstairs, the truck sat silent, smoke curling into the humid air. My tent, my cooler, my little escape, all left behind, like I'd never been there. Those things moved on, grunting into the night, and the forest swallowed my story whole. A house cleaner from Austin, gone in a blink, just another mess no one ever clean up. Man, I should have known this place was cursed the second I pulled in. That's what's rattling around in my head now, stuck out here with the Houston heat choking me and a bad feeling I can't shake. My name's Thane Jericho Voss, 28 years old, born and bred in San Antonio, Texas. I'm a line cook, grill burgers, fry wings, dodge grease burns for a living. It's loud, sweaty work, but I'm good at it, flipping patties like it's an art form. I drive a Toyota RAV4, a 2016 model I call Blue, cause it's the only decent thing about it. Still runs, even if the AC's on its last legs. This trip was my shot at some quiet after months of kitchen chaos. I'd been itching to ditch San Antonio for a bit. Love the city, Alamo vibes, spicy food, but the diner's been slamming me lately, all late shifts and screaming managers. Camping's my thing, always has been. Nothing beats a fire, a beer, and nobody yelling about onion rings. So, I tossed some cash together, loaded the SUV with a tent, my old Coleman stove, and a cooler stuffed with Lone Star and Bratz. Houston's not too far, and I'd heard about this spot near Lake Livingston, just north of the city. Chill, woodsy, perfect for a solo reset. Sounded like heaven. The drive up was smooth, just me and some gritty rock tunes. Windows down caused the AC's more of a suggestion than a feature. I talk to myself when I'm solo. Keeps the boredom at bay. Thane, you're gonna kick back and forget the fryer for once, I said, grinning as I passed those big Houston sprawl signs. I'd spent the last shift scrubbing grease off the flat top at this dive bar in San Antonio. Place smelled like burnt oil and regret, and all I wanted was fresh air. Now here I was, cruising up 59, the city fading behind me, feeling like I'd won the lottery. I hit the lake area around sunset, the sky all pink and gold, painting the water like some postcard. Found a little clearing off a side road. Nothing fancy, just flat dirt and pines, and parked the SUV. I'm no pro camper, but I've done this enough to know the drill. Popped the tent up quick, only cussed twice when the poles got tangled, and cracked a beer to celebrate. Sat on a folding chair, watching the light bleed out of the sky, and damn, it felt good, like the world finally hit pause. Even flipped a burger on the stove, just for kicks, and ate it straight off the spatula. The air was heavy, though. Houston's got that muggy swamp thing going, and I was sweating through my shirt in no time. I'd brought a little hand crank radio, tuned it to some static Y station playing Johnny Cash, and let it hum while I kicked back. Living the dream, I chuckled, wiping my brow. The woods were buzzing, crickets, frogs, the whole chorus, and it was nice, real nice. But there was this tiny nag in my chest, like when you smell smoke in the kitchen and can't find the source. Figured it was just me being jumpy after too many double shifts. I took a stroll before dark, stretching my legs after the drive. The SUV's headlights caught the trees as I wandered, kicking rocks and sipping my beer. I like my own company. Cooking's chaos. But out here, it's just me, no orders to mess up. I looped around the clearing, scoping out the lake's edge, when I noticed something. A weird pile of twigs, stacked all neat, like someone built a tiny teepee. Kids, maybe, I muttered, nudging it with my boot. Didn't think much of it then. Just some camper's art project, right? Man, I was wrong. Back at the tent, I settled in, radio crackling as the signal dipped. The burger sat heavy in my gut, and I sprawled out on my sleeping pad, letting the night sounds wash over me. Thought about texting my buddy back in San Antonio, maybe brag about the setup, but the bars were gone. Typical. I closed my eyes, ready to crash, and that's when I caught it. A whiff of something sour, like spoiled meat or wet trash. Probably the lake, I grumbled, rolling over. Should have paid attention, though, that smell wasn't natural. The crickets kept chirping, but they sounded off, frantic, almost. I shrugged it off, too tired to care, and drifted toward sleep. Looking back, that was my first clue something disturbing was brewing out there. I'm a cook, not a detective, but I should have known. When the air turns wrong, You don't just ignore it. That little twig pile, that smell, they were the start of a horror show I never saw coming, and I'd just RSVP'd without a clue. So I'm sprawled out in my tent, half asleep, when that sour smell hits me again, like someone dumped a trash bin full of week-old burger grease. I'm Thane Jericho Voss, 28, line cook from San Antonio, trying to catch a break near Houston, and already I'm wondering if this camping trip was a dumb move. I sat up, rubbed my face, and flicked on my flashlight. Probably just the wind off the lake, I told myself, but it didn't sit right. I've smelled some nasty stuff, fryer traps, spoiled mayo, but this was different, sharper, like it was alive. I unzipped the tent, poked my head out, and took a look around. The SUV was parked where I left it, blue's dented bumper catching the moonlight. Everything seemed fine. Cooler shut, stove off, no critters raiding my snacks. Still, I grabbed my boots, yanked them on, and stepped outside. The air was thick, sticking to my skin like a bad shift in the kitchen, and that smell was stronger now, almost metallic, like blood on a cutting board. Raccoons, maybe? I muttered, trying to laugh it off. Yeah, right. I figured I'd do a quick sweep, settle my nerves. I'm practical. Years of dodging grease fires taught me you don't ignore a hunch. You check it out. So I walked the clearing, flashlight bouncing off the pines. The beam shaky caused my hands wouldn't quit trembling. The woods were loud, crickets going nuts, but then they cut off, just like that. Dead quiet. My gut twisted, and I swung the light around, half expecting a deer or something. Instead, I saw tracks, boot prints, big ones, pressed deep in the dirt near my tent. Not mine. I wear sneakers, size 10. These were huge, like a linebacker stomped through. I crouched, ran my fingers over the edges, and my brain started spinning. Another camper? I said, voice low. Except this spot was off the beaten path. No trails, no signs. I stood up, wiped my hands on my jeans, and told myself, Thane, you're jumping at shadows. But those prints weren't old. Mud was still wet. I headed back to the tent, locking the SUV doors on the way, even though I wasn't sleeping in it. Call it paranoia, but I wasn't taking chances after that. Back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling those tracks meant trouble. I lay there, radio off now, staring at the tent ceiling. I started thinking about bailing, packing up, hitting the road back to San Antonio before dawn. I mean, I cook burgers, not fight off whatever's creeping around out here. But it was late, I was wiped, and part of me didn't want to admit I was spooked over some dirt. Sleep it off, I grumbled, pulling my sleeping bag tighter. It's nothing. Famous last words, huh? Morning came hot and sticky, sunlight blasting through the tent like a spotlight. I crawled out, stretched, and fired up the stove for coffee. Black, instant, bitter as hell. The daylight made things feel less creepy, you know? Like when you flip the kitchen lights on and the roaches scatter. I sipped my brew, scalded my tongue, and decided to poke around a bit. Maybe hike to the lake, shake off the weirdness. I locked the SUV, grabbed my backpack, and headed out. That's when I saw my cooler. Lid cracked open, brats gone, kins dented like something punched them. I cursed loud enough to scare the birds. Thought it was animals at first, but there were no claw marks, no mess. Just taken. What kind of raccoon does that? I said, kicking the dirt. I tied up the trash, double knotted it this time, and scanned the trees. Then I caught it, a flash, quick and bright, like light off a mirror. Up in the branches, maybe 20 yards out. My stomach dropped. Hello, I yelled, gripping my flashlight like a club. No answer, just a rustle, faint but there. I squinted, saw it again, definitely metal, maybe a lens. I stood there, heart thumping, trying to figure my next move. Shout again. Check it out. Head back. I'm not some tough guy. I once hid in the walk-in when a drunk customer got rowdy, but I wasn't about to let this ruin my trip. So I took a breath, adjusted my pack, and started toward the lake, acting like I didn't care. Big mistake, looking back. That flash wasn't some hiker's gear or a trick of the light. It was the first hint something scary was sizing me up, and I just waved it off like it was nothing. So I'm trudging toward Lake Livingston, pretending that flash in the trees was no big deal, but my gut's telling me I'm full of it. I'm Thane Jericho Voss, 28, line cook from San Antonio, supposed to be chilling near Houston, not playing hide-and-seek with some creepy vibe. The sun's high now, beating down through the pines, and I'm sweating like I'm back on the grill line during a rush. Then I hear it, a low, raspy wheeze, like a smoker hacking up a lung. I stop cold, turn slow, and mutter, "That ain't no bird." This wasn't just weird anymore. It was starting to feel scary. I gripped my flashlight tighter. Dumb, I know, it's daylight, but it's all I had. The wheeze came again, closer, from the direction of my campsite. "Hey, I'm just passing through," I shouted, trying to sound chill. Nothing answered, just a snap, like something big stepped on a stick. My heart kicked up, and I started backing away, eyes darting between the trees. I've burned myself on hot pans plenty, but this was a different kind of heat, like panic boiling up inside me. I was in deep, and I knew it. I turned and booked it down the path, sneakers slipping on pine needles, cursing myself for not packing a knife or something useful. The lake glittered ahead, all calm and pretty, but I wasn't stopping for pics. That's when I saw a movement, fast, jerky, cutting through the brush to my left. Not an animal, too tall, too wrong. My stomach flipped, and I yelled, "Oh, hell no." I've cleaned grease traps at 2 a.m., but this was disturbing on a whole new level. I ran faster, aiming for the open shore. About 10 yards from the water, I tripped, classic horror move, over something half buried in the dirt. I hit the ground hard, scraped my palms, and looked back. A skull, small, maybe a fox, cracked and fresh, with bits of fur still clinging to it. What the? I scrambled up, hands shaking as I fished my phone out and snapped a pic. Proof, right? Like that'd save me. The wheeze was loud now, joined by another, 2 of them, maybe more. I spun around, and there it was, a shape, hunched and lanky, stepping out from the trees, holding something long and sharp. I bolted for the SUV, legs burning, mind racing. The campsite was a mess when I got there. Tent slashed open, cooler flipped, my radio smashed like someone took a bat to it. "You've got to be shitting me," I groaned, circling blue. The driver's door was scratched, deep gouges, not animal claws, more like a blade dragged slow. I checked the tent. My sleeping bag was shredded, stuffing everywhere. This wasn't random chaos. This was a message. Something horror level was here, and it wasn't playing nice. I jumped into the SUV, locked the doors, and jammed the key in. The engine sputtered. "Come on, Blue, don't do me dirty now," but it caught. I sat there, panting, peering through the windshield. Then I saw them. 3 figures, maybe 4, easing out of the woods about 30 yards off. Tall, too tall, with arms that hung weird, like they didn't bend right. Their heads were wrapped in something. Rags, maybe, but I couldn't see faces. One raised that sharp thing, a machete, rusted and nasty, and my blood went cold. They didn't rush, just started walking toward me, deliberate, like they knew I was trapped. I threw the SUV into gear, hands slippery on the wheel, and peeled out, tires spinning in the dirt. "Get out of here, Thane," I yelled, flooring it toward the road. In the rear view, they picked up pace, not running, but closing fast. My heart was hammering, my brain screaming, "This ain't real." But it was, too real, too terrifying. I hit the pavement, swerving hard, and gunned it down the highway. The SUV rattled, old shocks groaning, but I didn't care. I just needed distance. Those things faded behind me, swallowed by the trees, but I could still feel them, like a bad smell you can't scrub off. I didn't know what they were, psychos, some backwoods cult, but they weren't human, not fully. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, and kept driving, praying I'd hit a town soon. The terror was choking me now, and I realized I'd stumbled into something way bigger and way deadlier than I could handle. So I'm tearing down this busted road in my SUV, pedal to the floor, with those machete-waving freaks shrinking in the rear view. I'm Thane Jericho Voss, 28, line cook from San Antonio, and right now I'm wishing I'd stayed home flipping burgers instead of camping near Houston. The engine's screaming, Blue shaking like she's about to fall apart, and I'm yelling, "Hold it together, girl," over the noise. Those things, whatever they are, aren't sprinting, but they're still moving, like they know I can't run forever. This isn't just scary anymore. This is life or death, and I'm barely hanging on. The road's a mess, potholes, gravel spitting under the tires, and I'm weaving like a drunk, trying not to spin out. My hands are slick, slipping on the wheel, and I can taste the panic, sour and sharp, like I bit into a bad lime. I glance back. Those figures are fading into the dust, but I swear one lifts that rusty blade, catching the sun. "Nope, not today," I shout, flooring it harder. I've dodged grease fires and angry drunks at the diner, but this is horror straight out of a nightmare, and I'm the idiot who walked into it. I spot a sign, Livingston, 10 miles. A town, real people, maybe a cop with a gun. My heart's hammering so loud it's drowning out the engine, and I'm thinking, just get there. Thane, just get there. But then, bang, something slams into the back, rocking the SUV. I swerve, fishtail, and check the mirror. A chunk of wood, maybe a branch, rolling in the road behind me. Did they throw it? My stomach flips, and I mutter, "You've got to be kidding." Those freaks are still back there, closer now, and I realize they're not giving up. They're hunting. The SUV starts coughing, a nasty rattle under the hood, and I smell it, burning oil. "Oh, come on, Blue." I groan, smacking the dash. Smoke's curling up now, thin but steady, and I know she's dying on me. I've pushed her too hard, too fast. Ahead, there's a turn-off, a dirt lot with a rusted-out trailer, no lights, no cars. Not ideal, but it's cover. I yank the wheel, skid in, and kill the engine, ducking low. My breath's ragged, chest tight, and I'm thinking, this is it, hide or die. I peek over the dash. The lot's quiet, just weeds and that trailer, looking like it hasn't seen life since the 80s. The road's empty for a sec, and I hold my breath, listening. Then I hear it. That wheeze, faint but getting louder, like they're closing in. I grab my backpack, fumble for my flashlight, and spot a tire iron under the seat. Better than nothing. I whisper, clutching it. Those things step into view, 3 of them, rags flapping around their heads, moving slow but sure, like they can smell me. My skin's crawling, and I know I'm in a real life or death jam. I slide lower, heart pounding, and start planning. Stay put? Run? I'm no hero. I once hid behind the dumpster when a bar fight broke out, but I'm not ready to check out. The SUV's toast, smoke thickening, so I've got to move. I crack the door, wincing at the creak, and slip out, keeping the tire iron close. The air's heavy, stinking of oil and that sour rot from before, and I hear their boots, thud, thud, on the pavement. I dart for the trailer, legs pumping, praying it's unlocked or empty. I hit the side, flatten against it, and edge toward the door, peeling paint, a busted lock hanging loose. Jackpot. I slip inside, pull it shut, and brace it with my shoulder. It's dark, smells like mold and old beer, like a dive bar's basement, and I'm shaking so bad the tire iron's rattling. Outside, the wheezing stops, replaced by a scrape. Metal on metal, slow and deliberate. They're here, right here, and I can feel their weight shifting the silence. I grip the iron tighter, whispering, "You've got this, Thane," but I'm not so sure. Something thumps the trailer wall, hard, and the whole thing shakes. I bite my tongue to keep quiet, tasting blood, and peer through a crack in the boarded window. One's right outside, blade dragging along the siding, leaving a gouge. Its head tilts, like it's listening, and I freeze, barely breathing. I've got seconds, run out the back, fight, or pray they move on. The trailer's a trap, and I'm the dumbass who picked it. They're not leaving, and I'm cornered, staring down the kind of danger that doesn't let you walk away. So I'm pinned in this rotting trailer, back against the door, tire iron shaking in my hands like I'm some kind of action movie reject. I'm Thane Jericho Voss, 28, line cook from San Antonio, and I'm way past regretting this Houston camping trip. Now it's just about surviving. Those rag-headed freaks are outside, scraping their blades along the siding, and the sound's drilling into my skull. My SUV's dead in the lot, smoking like a grease fire, and I've got nowhere left to run. I made a deadly mistake coming in here, and it's hitting me hard. This is where it ends. The trailer's a dump, sticky floors, broken chairs, a sink full of something black and stinking. I sweep my flashlight around, desperate for anything. A back exit, a weapon, a damn miracle. My beam catches a shelf, sagging with cans and junk, and I shove it against the door, grunting as it scrapes. "Buy me a minute," I mutter, wiping sweat off my face. I've handled kitchen chaos, spilled oil, screaming chefs, but this is horror I can't flip my way out of. My chest's tight, like I'm drowning in the humid air. I spot a window, cracked, boarded up, but loose. I grab a busted chair leg, start prying at the nails, whispering, "Come on, come on." The wood splinters, cutting my hand, and I hiss. Blood's dripping now, hot and slick. Outside, the scraping stops, and that wheeze kicks up again. Close, too close. I yank the board free, glass crunching under my boots, and peek out. One's right there, 10 feet off, blade raised like it's posing for a slasher flick. My stomach drops, and I realize bolting out there's suicide. The door rattles, hard, and the shelf shifts. Shit! I yelp, stumbling back. I swing the tire iron up, ready to swing, but my hands are jelly. I'm no fighter. I'm the guy who hides when the bar gets rowdy. The door buckles, and one of them steps in, tall, hunched, rags flapping like a scarecrow from hell. Its blades dripping, dark, wet, fresh, and I gag, smelling that sour rot up close. Stay back, I shout, voice cracking, but it just tilts its head, like I'm a burger it's about to carve. I swing wild, tire iron clanging off its arm. Feels like hitting a pipe. It grabs my shirt, yanks me forward, and I'm flailing, kicking at its legs. My flashlight drops, beam spinning crazy across the floor, and I see another one behind it, blade glinting. No, no, no. I scream, twisting free, but I trip over the chair, crashing down hard. My head slams the counter, stars explode, and I'm scrambling, blood in my eyes, thinking, this is it. I'd screwed up, picking this trailer, thinking I could hide from something this disturbing. It looms over me, blade high, and I throw my hands up. Useless, I know. I'm picturing San Antonio, the diner, my beat-up couch, the cold Lone Star I'll never crack again. The tire iron's gone, rolled under the sink, and I'm just meat now, like the stuff I grill. The blade drops, fast and quiet, and pain rips through my shoulder. Hot, wet, blinding. I scream, thrashing, but it's got me pinned, and the second one steps in, raising its own weapon. My mistake was stopping, thinking I could outsmart this nightmare. Everything blurs, blood's pooling, my arms numb, and I'm fading fast. The last thing I hear is that wheeze, like a laugh, and the last thing I feel is the cold steel biting deeper. Outside, the SUV sits silent, smoke curling into the night. My tent, my cooler, my dumb little getaway. All left behind, scattered like grease on a grill. Those things shuffle off, dragging their blades, and the trailer goes still. A cook from San Antonio, gone in a flash, just another mess nobody's cleaning up. The woods swallow it all, my screams, my blood, my story. Lake Livingston glitters in the distance, calm as ever, like nothing happened. But something did, a tragedy, quick and brutal, and I was the fool who walked right into it. No one will find me, not here, not in time. Just another night near Houston, and another body that won't make it home. Lord, I never should have rolled the dice on this damn trip. That's the regret gnawing at me now, stuck out here with the Houston humidity wrapping around me like a wet rag I can't shake off. My name's Saffron Elise Drayton, 35, from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm a delivery driver, hauling packages, dodging traffic, living off coffee and grit. It's a grind, but I've got a knack for it, weaving through streets like I was born with a steering wheel in my hands. I drive a Honda CR-V, a 2018 model I call Gator, cause it's green and tougher than it looks. This getaway was supposed to be my breather after months of double shifts and late-night routes. I'd been itching to peel out of Baton Rouge for a while. Love the place. Crawfish, jazz, that bayou soul, but it's relentless, and lately, I felt like I'm running on fumes. Camping's my escape, always has been. Just me, a tent, and no one else's packages to track. So, I scraped some cash together, loaded the SUV with my gear, a cooler full of Abita beer and po' boy fixings, and pointed myself toward Houston. Heard about this spot near Lake Houston, quiet and tucked away, perfect for a long weekend. Sounded like a dream after dodging potholes and porch pirates. The drive was easy, just me and some Zydeco tunes cranking through Gator speakers, windows down 'cause I like the breeze. I talk to myself on the road, keeps me sharp. Saffron, you're gonna kick back and forget the GPS for once, I said, grinning as I crossed the state line. I'd spent the last week hauling boxes in Baton Rouge, big ones, heavy ones, the kind that make your back scream, and all I wanted was to ditch the chaos. Now here I was, rolling down 59 into Houston, the city lights fading as I aimed for the woods, feeling like I'd finally cut loose. I hit the lake area around dusk, the sky turning this deep purple that made the water glow like something holy. Found a little spot off a back road, gravelly, ringed by oaks, and parked the SUV. I'm no camping pro, but I've done this enough to fake it. Set up my tent quick, only banged my thumb once with the mallet, and cracked a beer to toast myself. Sat on the tailgate, sipping slow, watching the light drain out of the day. It was peaceful, crickets humming, a breeze rustling the leaves, and I felt my shoulders unclench for the first time in forever. The air was thick, though. Houston's got that sticky swamp feel, and I was sweating through my tank top in minutes. I'd brought a little battery lantern, hung it from the tent pole, and let it cast a soft glow while I munched on a cold shrimp po' boy. Living large, I chuckled, wiping mayo off my chin. The woods were alive, frogs croaking, bugs buzzing, and it was nice, real nice. But there was this tiny twitch in my gut, like when you deliver to a sketchy house and the lights are off, but someone's home. Figured it was just me being wired from the road. I took a walk before dark, stretching my legs after hours behind the wheel. The SUV's headlights lit up the trees as I wandered, kicking pebbles and sipping my beer. I'm good alone, driving solitary, and I like the quiet, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, couldn't say why. Near the lake's edge, I spotted something odd, a line of rocks, stacked neat and deliberate, like a kid's project, but too perfect. Weird, I muttered, nudging one with my boot. Didn't think much of it. Just some camper's quirk, right? Should have known better. Back at the tent, I settled in, lantern flickering as I sprawled out. Thought about texting my sister in Baton Rouge, maybe send a pic of the setup, but the signal was spotty. Figures. I cracked another beer, let the night sounds wash over me, and tried to unwind. That's when I caught it, a whiff of something bitter, like burnt rubber or old fish, cutting through the damp air. Lake stink, I grumbled, brushing it off. But it lingered, sharp and wrong, and I should have listened to that twitch in my gut. It was the first hint something disturbing was brewing out here. The crickets kept going, but they sounded edgy, like they were rushing to get somewhere. I shrugged it off, too beat to care, and closed my eyes. Looking back, that smell, those rocks, they were warning signs, and I'd ignored them like a rookie driver missing a detour. I deliver packages, not decode creepy woods, but I should have known. When something feels off, you don't just sleep through it. That was my first step into a horror show I wasn't ready for, and I just punched my ticket. So I'm lying in my tent, drifting off, when that bitter stink, burnt rubber meets dead fish, slaps me awake again. I'm Saffron Elise Drayton, 35, delivery driver from Baton Rouge, trying to unwind near Houston, and already I'm second-guessing this whole camping gig. I sat up, fumbled for my lantern, and cranked the brightness. Just the lake, Saff, I told myself, but it didn't feel right. I've hauled packages past some rank alleys, dumpsters, roadkill, but this was sharper, like it was creeping closer. My gut was buzzing, and I couldn't shake it. I unzipped the tent, stuck my head out, and scanned the campsite. The SUV sat there, Gator's green paint dull in the moonlight, everything looking normal, cooler closed, trash bag tied, no critters sniffing around. Still, I grabbed my sneakers, yanked them on over my socks, and stepped out. The air was like a wet blanket, heavy and warm, and that smell hit harder. Almost chemical, like something rotting under a hood. Maybe a dead animal, I mumbled, forcing a laugh. Didn't land, though. My nerves were jangling. I figured a quick walk around would calm me down. I'm practical. Years of dodging late deliveries taught me you don't sit on a bad vibe. You check it out. So I grabbed my flashlight, not some fancy one, just a beat-up thing from the glove box, and started circling the clearing. The woods were humming, frogs and bugs going full blast, but then it all cut out, like someone flipped a switch. My chest tightened, and I swung the light around, muttering, "Come on now." That's when I saw them, scratches, fresh ones, carved into a tree trunk near the SUV, jagged and deep. I stepped closer, ran my fingers over the gashes, and my brain started racing. Kids? Drunks? I said, voice low. Except this was no party spot, too quiet, too off-grid. The scratches weren't random either. 3 lines, parallel, like claw marks, but too clean. I backed off, wiped my hands on my jeans, and told myself, "Saffron, you're spooking yourself." But my pulse was thumping, and I locked the SUV doors on my way back to the tent, even though I wasn't sleeping in it. Felt safer, somehow, like that'd keep whatever was out there at bay. Back inside, I couldn't shake those marks. I sprawled out, lantern dimmed, and started rethinking this trip. I deliver packages. I'm not built for some scary backwoods puzzle. I thought about packing up, hitting the road back to Baton Rouge before sunrise. But it was late, my eyes were heavy, and I didn't want to admit a few scratches had me rattled. Sleep it off, I grumbled, tugging my sleeping bag up. Ain't nothing out there. Yeah, famous last words, right? Morning rolled in sticky and bright, sun blasting through the tent like a spotlight. I crawled out, stretched my aching back, too many boxes, too little yoga, and fired up my little stove for coffee. The daylight smoothed things over, you know? Like when you drop a package and it's fine once you pick it up. I sipped my brew, burnt my lip, and decided to explore a bit. Maybe hike to the lake, clear my head. Locked the SUV, grabbed my backpack, and headed out. That's when I saw it. My trash bag, ripped wide open, beer cans crushed flat, po' wrappers shredded. I cursed under my breath, figured critters at first, but there were no prints, no claw tears. Just destroyed. What kind of coon does that? I said, half laughing as I cleaned it up, stuffing the mess into a fresh bag. I tied it tight, double knotted, and glanced around. Then I caught it, a flicker, quick and shiny, up in the oaks about 15 yards off. My heart skipped. Hey, who's there? I called, gripping my flashlight like a bat. No answer, just a rustle, soft, but deliberate. I squinted, saw it again, light bouncing off something metal, maybe glass. I stood there, frozen, trying to figure my play. Yell again? Check it out? Bail? I'm not some tough chick. I once hid in my SUV when a dog chased me on a route, but I wasn't about to let this trash my weekend. So I took a deep breath, slung my pack higher, and started toward the lake, acting like I didn't give a damn. Big mistake, looking back. That flicker wasn't some camper's gear or a fluke. It was the first real sign something disturbing was watching me, and I just shrugged it off like it was nothing. So I'm hoofing it toward Lake Houston, pretending that flicker in the trees was just my imagination running wild, but my gut's screaming I'm full of crap. I'm Saffron Elise Drayton, 35, delivery driver from Baton Rouge, supposed to be kicking back near Houston, not playing chicken with some creepy feeling. The sun's blazing now, cooking me through my tank top, and I'm wiping sweat off my brow when I hear it. A low, wet gurgle, like a drain unclogging slow. I stop dead, turn, and mutter, that ain't no frog. This wasn't just odd anymore. It was turning scary fast. I tightened my grip on my flashlight, useless in daylight, but it felt like armor, and scanned the woods. The gurgle came again, nearer, back toward my campsite. Hey, I'm just passing by. I hollered, trying to sound tough. No reply, just a crack, like something heavy snapped a branch. My heart kicked into overdrive, and I started backing up, eyes darting everywhere. I've dodged sketchy drop-offs in dark neighborhoods, but this was a whole new level of horror brewing, and I could feel it in my bones. I turned and hustled down the path, sneakers sliding on loose gravel, cursing myself for not packing a knife or even a damn whistle. The lake shimmered ahead, all serene and mocking, but I wasn't stopping to admire it. That's when I saw it. Something darting through the trees, quick and low, not animal-like, too purposeful. My stomach lurched, and I yelled, "Oh, hell no." I've hauled packages through storms and worse, but this was disturbing, like something out of a bad dream I couldn't wake from. I broke into a run, aiming for the SUV. Halfway back, I nearly ate dirt tripping over something. A pile of feathers, fresh, still bloody, like a bird got torn apart mid-flight. What the? I stammered, fumbling my phone out to snap a pic, hands shaking. Evidence, right? Like that'd matter. The gurgle hit again, loud and doubled. 2 sources now, maybe more. I spun around, and there it was, a figure, squat and hunched, stepping out from the oaks, dragging something long and jagged. My breath caught. This wasn't a hiker or a prank. I bolted for the campsite, legs burning, mind spinning. When I got there, it was trashed, tent flaps torn, cooler flipped, my lantern smashed like someone stomped it. You've got to be kidding me, I groaned, circling the SUV. The passenger window was cracked, glass webbing out from a hole, and the door handle was bent. I checked the tent. My sleeping bag was sliced, stuffing spilling out. This wasn't random. This was personal, like something horror level was marking its territory, and I was in it. I dove into the SUV, locked the doors, and jammed the key in. Gator sputtered, "Don't you dare, girl," but roared to life. I sat there, panting, peering out the windshield. Then I saw them. 3 shapes, maybe 4, easing out of the trees about 40 yards off. Short, stocky, wrapped in filthy cloth, heads too big for their bodies. One hefted that jagged thing, a saw, maybe, rusted and dripping, and my mouth went dry. "This ain't happening," I whispered, but it damn well was. They started moving, slow, shambling, but straight for me. I threw the SUV into reverse, hands slick on the wheel, and peeled back, kicking up dirt. "Get out of here, Saf," I shouted, swinging onto the road and flooring it. In the rear view, they shuffled faster, not running, but gaining, like they knew the terrain. My pulse was hammering, my brain yelling, "Go, go, go." I didn't know what they were, crazies, swamp freaks, but they weren't right, not human right, and I'd stumbled into their mess. The SUV jolted over ruts, engine growling, and I kept pushing, praying for pavement. Those things faded into the haze, but I could still feel them, like a bad delivery address you can't unsee. The terror was real now, choking me, and I knew I'd kicked a hornet's nest I couldn't outrun forever. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, and aimed for anywhere but here, hoping I'd hit a road with people before they caught up. So I'm tearing down this dirt track in my SUV, gas pedal mashed, with those gurgling freaks fading in the dust behind me. I'm Saffron Elise Drayton, 35, delivery driver from Baton Rouge, and right now I'd give anything to be back hauling packages instead of fleeing near Houston. The engine's howling, Gator rattling like she's about to bust, and I'm yelling, "Don't quit on me now," over the noise. Those things, those cloth-wrapped nightmares with their saws, aren't charging, but they're still coming, like they know I'm screwed either way. This isn't just scary. This is life or death, and I'm hanging by a thread. The road's a nightmare. Ruts, rocks, branches clawing at the sides, and I'm swerving like a maniac, trying not to flip. My hands are sweaty, sliding on the wheel, and my heart's pounding so hard I can feel it in my throat. I glance back. Those figures are shrinking, but one lifts that rusted saw, glinting like a bad omen. "Not today, you bastards," I shout, pushing Gator harder. I've dodged late-night drop-offs in dicey spots, but this is horror I didn't sign up for, and it's chasing me down. I spot a sign, Humble, 12 miles. A town, lights, maybe a gas station with a phone. "Just get there, Saf," I mutter, wiping my eyes with my sleeve. Then, thwack, something slams the roof, rocking the SUV. I yelp, duck low, and check the mirror. A chunk of metal, rebar maybe, bounces in the road behind me. Did they throw it? My gut twists, and I hiss, "Oh, come on." They're still back there, closer than I'd like, and I realize this isn't a chase. It's a hunt, and I'm the catch. The SUV starts shuddering, a nasty grind kicking up from the engine, and I smell it. Hot oil, sharp and bitter. "No, no, no," I groan, smacking the dash. Smoke's trickling out now, and I know Gator's toast. I've run her ragged. Up ahead, there's a pull-off. A gravel lot with a boarded-up shack. No cars, no help. It's a gamble, but I've got no choice. I yank the wheel, skid in, and cut the engine, crouching low. My breath's ragged, chest burning, and I'm thinking, hide or die. Pick fast. I peek over the dash. The lot's dead quiet, just overgrown grass and that shack, looking like it's been forgotten since Katrina. The road's still for a sec, and I hold my breath, listening. Then I hear it. That gurgle, wet and close, rolling in like a tide. I grab my backpack, fish out my flashlight, and spot a crowbar wedged under the seat. Better than nothing. I whisper, gripping it tight. Those things shuffle into view. 3, maybe 4, saws dragging, moving slow but relentless. My skin's crawling, and I know I'm in a real life or death mess. I slide lower, pulse racing, and start plotting. Stay put? Run for it. I'm no badass. I once locked myself in Gator when a drop-off guy got creepy, but I'm not ready to cash out. The SUV's done, smoke thickening, so I've got to move. I crack the door, wincing at the squeak, and slip out, keeping the crowbar close. The air's sour, heavy with rot and oil, and I hear their steps, shuffle, scrape, getting louder. I dart for the shack, legs pumping, praying it's empty or at least got a lock. I hit the wall, flattened against the splintered wood, and edged toward the door, rusted, half off its hinges, but it's something. I shove it open, slip inside, and pull it shut, bracing it with my shoulder. It's dark, reeks of damp and decay, like a flooded warehouse I delivered to once, and I'm shaking so bad the crowbar's rattling. Outside, the gurgling stops, swapped for a slow scrape. Metal on gravel, deliberate. They're here, right outside, and I can feel their weight pressing in. I grip the crowbar tighter, whispering, "You've got this, Saf," but I'm not fooling anyone. The shack shakes, bam, like something rammed it, and dust rains from the ceiling. I bite my lip, tasting sweat, and squint through a gap in the boards. One's there, saw dragging, cloth flapping like a torn flag. Its head swivels, like it's sniffing me out, and I freeze, barely breathing. I've got seconds, bolt out back, swing, or pray they pass. This shack's a coffin, and I'm the idiot who climbed in. They're not leaving, and I'm trapped, staring down a danger that's gonna chew me up if I don't move fast. So I'm jammed up in this crumbling shack, shoulder against the door, crowbar slippery in my sweaty hands like I'm auditioning for a slasher flick I didn't sign up for. I'm Saffron Elise Drayton, 35, delivery driver from Baton Rouge, and I'm way past wishing I'd skipped this Houston trip. Now it's just about not dying. Those gurgling freaks are outside, saws scraping the gravel, and the sounds clawing at my nerves. My SUV's a smoking wreck in the lot, and I've got no way out. I made a deadly mistake holing up here, and it's sinking in. This is where the road ends. The shack's a pit, rotted planks, a table flipped over, air thick with mold and something worse. I swing my flashlight around, hunting for anything. A back door, a weapon, a shred of hope. My beam catches a pile of junk, rusted tools, broken bottles, and I grab a jagged shard of glass, wrapping my sleeve around it. Backup plan, I mutter, shoving the table against the door. I've hauled packages through hellish weather, but this is horror I can't outrun, and it's closing in tight. I hear a thud, low, heavy, and the wall shakes. Come on, I hiss, bracing harder. There's a window, smashed, boarded loose, so I scramble over, prying at the nails with the crowbar. They squeal, my hands bleed, and I'm cursing every choice that got me here. The gurgling's right outside now, wet and loud, and I peek through a crack. One's there, saw raised, cloth flapping like a ghost shroud. My stomach flips. I'm trapped, and bolting out there's a death sentence. Should have kept driving, not stopped like some rookie. The door buckles, crack, and the table slides. I yelp, spinning around, crowbar up like I've got a clue how to fight. One shuffles in, stocky, hunched, reeking of rot. It saw dripping something dark and fresh. Get back, I shout, voice breaking, but it just lurches closer, head cocked like I'm a package it's sizing up. I swing wild, crowbar clanging off its arm. Feels like hitting brick. It grabs my wrist, twists hard, and I drop the glass, kicking at its legs. My flashlight rolls, beam bouncing crazy, and I see another one in the doorway, saw glinting. I stumble back, tripping over the junk, and slam into the wall. Pain shoots up my spine. No, no, no. I scream, flailing, but my arm's numb, crowbar gone. Blood's trickling from my hand, hot and sticky, and I'm thinking, this is it. I'd messed up, picking this shack, thinking I could hide from something this disturbing. The first one looms over me, saw high, and I flash to Baton Rouge. My beat-up couch, my sister's gumbo, the routes I'll never run again. I'm just cargo now, and they're the delivery. It swings, fast and quiet, and pain rips through my side, sharp, wet, blinding. I scream, thrashing, but it's got me pinned, and the second one steps up, saw ready. My mistake was stopping, thinking I could outsmart this nightmare instead of flooring it to humble. Everything's fading, blood's pooling, my legs won't move, and I'm choking on the panic. The last thing I feel is the saw biting deeper, cold and final, and the last thing I hear is that gurgle, like a sick laugh. I delivered myself right to them. The shack goes still, dust settling over my mess. Outside, the SUV sits silent, smoke curling into the muggy air. My tent, my cooler, my little break, all left behind, scattered like dropped packages. Those things shuffle off, saws dragging, and the night swallows what's left. A driver from Baton Rouge, gone quick and messy, just another stop no one will check on. Lake Houston glints in the distance, untouched, like it never saw a thing. This was my tragedy, solo, stupid, and final. The woods take it all, my screams, my blood, my dumb hope, and nobody's coming to sign for me. Just another night near Houston, and another body that won't make it back. I wish I'd listened to my gut before setting off on this disturbing trip. The moment I felt that odd sense of regret settle over my shoulders, I should have canceled everything and stayed in Dallas. My name's Morgan Lee Baxter. I'm 28 years old, and I was born and raised on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. From a young age, I always craved a taste of freedom and the thrill of exploring the unknown. The open road called out to me louder than any city traffic, and so I spent countless weekends seeking out hidden lakes and tucked-away state parks. This time, however, my curiosity and love for adventure might have led me down a scary path I never saw coming. Because now, I'm holed up in Houston with a heart that won't stop thudding against my chest, reliving every horrifying moment that brought me here. You know how sometimes you just have a feeling that something dark is lurking right around the corner? That's exactly what happened to me. And let me tell you, ignoring that chill in your bones can cost you big time. It all began when I decided it was time for a solo camping trip, something to clear my mind after a rough patch at work. Being cooped up in my apartment, day after day, had started to weigh on me. My friends couldn't join because they were tangled in their own responsibilities, so I packed my gear and jumped into my trusty Ford F-150, which I'll just call the truck from now on. I planned to drive down to a secluded area near the Sam Houston National Forest, which is a couple hours north of the city itself. People say it's got that classic East Texas wilderness vibe: tall pines, thick underbrush, and wide open spaces that make you feel both free and uneasy at the same time. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a relaxing getaway, a chance to recharge under the stars, make esmores by a crackling fire, and let the nighttime air clear my head. But the deeper I drove into that lonely stretch of highway, the more I sensed something was off. If you've ever taken I-45 down from Dallas to Houston, you might know those long, eerie miles of farmland and open fields. There's a certain emptiness out there that can feel both peaceful and creepy, especially when the sun starts to go down. The fading light painted the horizon in shades of purple and gold, and everything seemed to slip into shadow like a slow-moving curtain. I tried to shake off the tension by blasting some rock music and rolling down the windows, letting the warm evening air whip around me. But the unsettling feeling wouldn't quit. It was as though I could sense eyes on me from beyond the tree line. Even though logically I knew that was ridiculous. I remember muttering, "Get a grip, Morgan," while I gripped the wheel tighter than I ever had in my life. It might sound silly, but in that moment, it felt like the calm before a scary storm. Houston loomed closer on the horizon, glowing with city lights. But I wasn't planning to go straight into the city itself. My campsite was off a remote road that branched away from the main highway, leading into a labyrinth of tall pine forests. I'd done my research online, checked out reviews, looked at photos, but there was something about those pictures that didn't quite capture the eerie reality of the place. Even the name of the campground was unusual: White Oak Bend. It was said to be quiet most times of the year, often overlooked by tourists because it wasn't jam-packed with flashy amenities. That's exactly what I wanted: peace, seclusion, and an escape from everyday life. Yet driving down the dirt path that led to White Oak Bend, I noticed how the darkness seemed thicker out here. The only sounds were my tires crushing gravel and the distant hum of insects. I started to feel like I was walking into a trap, or the opening scene of a scary movie where you just know the main character has no clue what's coming. I arrived in the evening, set up my tent, and got a small fire going near a cluster of tall trees. Normally, I'd be stoked to finally be in the wild, breathing in the fresh scent of pine needles and letting the crackle of the fire soothe my nerves. But a strange silence hung in the air, broken only by random rustles in the undergrowth. At times, I thought I heard faint whispers, but it could have been the wind swirling through the branches. It made my skin crawl anyway. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the task at hand, organizing my gear, laying out my sleeping bag, and getting dinner ready. It was just hot dogs and some veggies, nothing fancy, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, as if expecting something to jump out. Every little noise felt amplified, like the forest was alive with disturbing intent. I remember thinking, this is a little too quiet for comfort. But silly me, I shrugged it off and told myself that was the whole point, a break from the chaos of the city. Once I'd eaten and cleaned up, I settled down by the fire, flipping through a travel magazine for new camping spots. My phone signal was weak at best, so I couldn't distract myself with social media. Strangely enough, that made me even more uneasy. It's one thing to willingly go off-grid, but it's another thing entirely to be forced there because you've got no bars on your phone. I felt cut off from the world, like I was in my own private bubble of pitch-black wilderness. I started reading an article about haunted campsites across America. Big mistake. I know it's kind of ironic, right? Sitting around a campsite in the middle of nowhere, reading a scary piece about bizarre sightings, ghost stories, and true crimes near campgrounds. I guess part of me enjoyed feeding my sense of thrill and horror. But the more I read, the more every snap of a twig nearby made my heart lurch. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched, and that feeling stuck to me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Feeling restless, I decided to walk a little ways around the campground to get a sense of my surroundings. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing gnarled tree roots and undergrowth that seemed to twist like snakes under my feet. I made sure not to wander too far, though, because the forest looked endless, and one wrong turn could get me lost for hours. Every so often, I'd call out, "Hello," just to test if anybody else was camped out nearby. Usually, you can hear faint chatter or see the glow of someone else's fire if others are around. But there was nothing. It was like being in a vacuum, totally alone. That's when a light drizzle started up, making the pine needles glisten in the beam of my flashlight and forming tiny puddles at the edges of the clearing. I took that as my cue to head back to my tent, hoping that a bit of rain would lull me to sleep. But as I unzipped the tent door, a sudden sense of dread swept through me, and I had no idea why. It felt so strong that I literally paused, half in and half out of the tent, scanning the forest like a hawk. Nothing looked out of place, yet the air was thick with that disturbing vibe. Eventually, I crawled into my sleeping bag, hoping that exhaustion would knock me out. The wind picked up, rustling the tree branches overhead, while rain pattered softly on my tent. My mind kept drifting to all kinds of scary stories I'd read online. Folks disappearing, weird lights in the woods, cabins with dark secrets. I tried to reassure myself by thinking, "All right, Morgan, you've camped plenty of times before. You'll be fine." But the reassurance was thin. I think part of me knew that something was brewing. A chain of events that would shatter my little adventure and leave me wishing I'd never come here in the first place. I can't even say exactly what triggered it, but I felt like a sitting duck out there in the dark. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it was that uneasy anticipation that maybe, just maybe, the next sound I heard wouldn't be from the wind or a small critter scurrying by. And let me tell you, the moment that premonition became reality was the moment I realized my life was about to change in a way I couldn't undo. I woke up sometime after midnight, jolted by what I swore sounded like a human voice just outside my tent. My first instinct was to hold my breath and stay absolutely still, like if I didn't move, maybe whatever was out there wouldn't notice me. You ever do that? Just freeze because you think you'll blend into the darkness or something? My heart hammered so loud I was scared whoever, or whatever, was out there might hear it. I flicked on my flashlight, but that narrow beam of light didn't show anything unusual. No footsteps, no silhouette, no sign that someone had been close at all. Still, I felt this disturbing chill grip my spine, like a warning that I wasn't truly alone in the forest. I tried convincing myself it was probably a dream or a trick of my half-asleep mind. But you know how sometimes your instincts keep nagging you, telling you something scary is going on beneath the surface? That's exactly how it felt. Lying back down, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Every time a branch snapped or an owl hooted, I'd tense up, expecting the worst. The air inside the tent felt suffocating, like all the oxygen had been swallowed by fear. A part of me considered packing up right then and there, but I told myself I was overreacting. After all, this was supposed to be an adventure, right? Who bails on a camping trip just because of a few unsettling noises? So I forced my eyes shut and tried to drift off again, half hoping I'd wake up to a peaceful sunrise and laugh at my own paranoia. Morning did come, but it didn't bring the calm I'd been counting on. A strange hush still blanketed the campsite, and even the birdsong felt muted, like nature was holding its breath. After stumbling out of my tent, I checked around the site for any clues that someone might have wandered too close during the night. Nothing seemed disturbed, aside from a few newly broken branches on the ground. For a moment, I considered heading out to a nearby diner for breakfast, thinking a stack of pancakes in a bustling place might knock the scary thoughts out of my head. But part of me wanted to prove I wasn't scared off that easily. So I heated up some coffee over the fire, ate a protein bar, and tried to mentally reset for the day. I figured a quick trip into Houston for some sightseeing could give me a break from the eerie vibe. I packed up a few essentials and hopped in my truck, planning on coming back to the campsite in the late afternoon. Driving into the city, I immediately felt some relief seeing other cars, traffic lights, and all the normal hustle and bustle. But the entire time, my mind kept drifting back to White Oak Bend. I told myself, "Relax, Morgan, you're just spooked because you're out there alone." After all, I'd been on scary adventures before, like that time I camped at a site near Big Bend and heard coyotes howling all night. This wasn't my first rodeo, so I reminded myself to keep a level head and enjoy the day. While in Houston, I stopped by a little barbecue joint near the Heights neighborhood. The moment I walked in, the smoky aroma of brisket and ribs made me forget my worries for a minute. I struck up a conversation with an older guy at the counter who seemed curious about my gear. He asked if I was traveling through for business or pleasure. I said, "Mostly pleasure, doing a little camping outside the city." His brow furrowed when I mentioned White Oak Bend. He warned me that folks around here sometimes talk about weird happenings in those woods. Nonsense, I thought. But the uneasy feeling in my gut flared up again when he asked if I was alone. I half laughed it off, telling him I liked the solitude, but deep down, I felt a tiny flicker of dread. Was there something about that place that everyone knew, except me? I hit a couple of shops for extra supplies, more firewood, a few extra bottles of water, and a small first aid kit I realized I was missing. Somehow, stocking up on those items gave me a little confidence boost. You know how it feels when you're more prepared? Like you've got some control over a scary situation, even if it's just an illusion. The city's noise and energy started to lull me into a more normal mood, and by the time I got back into my truck, I almost believed last night's fear had been an overblown reaction. Tonight will be different, I told myself, because now I know what to expect, and I'm more prepared. The drive back to the campsite felt heavier, though. The closer I got to White Oak Bend, the more the sky seemed to gray over with a thick canopy of clouds. The warm, humid air stuck to my skin like glue, and the pines towered overhead, blotting out patches of light. Every now and then, I'd see old houses or abandoned buildings on the side of the road, places that looked like they'd been forgotten for decades. That lingering sense of something scary crept back in. Passing by a rotting billboard, I thought I saw graffiti scrawled in red, but it was too faded to read. My mind started spinning dark scenarios about what might be lurking out here, but I forced myself to focus on the road, determined to not let my imagination run wild. Once I arrived back at the campground, I unpacked my supplies and noticed the place felt even more deserted than before. No fresh tire marks, no new tents, just that same stretch of empty land, sprinkled with tall grass and thick pines, hiding secrets in the shadows. I walked around, calling out a friendly hey, in case anybody else was around. But the only response was my own echo bouncing off the trees. My plan was to make dinner, relax by the fire again, and get a good night's sleep before exploring some hiking trails the next morning. But somewhere deep inside, I sensed that if anything disturbing was going to happen, it'd happen soon. And let me tell you, once night fell, that's exactly when stuff started to spiral out of control and push me closer to a horrifying reality I wasn't prepared to face. I spent the rest of that afternoon double-checking every inch of my little campsite, looking for any clue that might explain the unease gnawing at me. At first glance, everything looked normal, tin intact, a neat stack of wood for the fire, and my folding chair propped against a tree. Still, I couldn't ignore the weight pressing on my chest, making each breath feel like a chore. Something told me that I was standing on the edge of a scary revelation, like a silent alarm ringing inside my head. Regardless, I tried to keep a level head. I made sure my truck was ready for a quick getaway if things went south, tested the flashlight batteries, and laid out my pocket knife where I could grab it in a heartbeat. It felt weird having to think about self-defense on a simple camping trip, but the disturbing vibes from the previous night weren't about to let me relax. By sunset, a murky twilight settled over the forest. The hazy clouds overhead created a dim, orange glow that bled into the trees, making everything look like a scene out of some horror flick. Crickets started their evening chorus, but even their songs seemed subdued. I remember hearing a single owl hoot somewhere in the distance, and for some reason, it sent a chill straight up my spine. Determined to shake off my paranoia, I tried focusing on something constructive. I lit a decent campfire, arranged a couple of stones around it, and used a small portable grill to cook dinner. The smell of sizzling sausages and veggies usually makes me feel safe, bringing back childhood memories of family cookouts. But tonight, every bite tasted like cardboard, and every rustle beyond the tree line made me pause mid-chew. The tension was thick in the air, an invisible presence looming just out of sight. After finishing my half-hearted meal, I decided to kill some time by organizing the back of my truck. I hauled out the camping tools, sorted through my spare clothes, and took inventory of my water supply. That's when I noticed something off. A plastic container of food I'd stowed earlier was missing. At first, I assumed I'd misplaced it in my rush to get to Houston earlier, but I was absolutely certain I'd put it right behind my seat next to the cooler. I walked circles around the campsite, shining my flashlight under every bush and behind every tree, but it was nowhere to be found. Was it a raccoon? A fox? It seemed unlikely they'd figure out how to open the truck door, which I'd locked anyway. The realization that some stranger could have snuck onto my site while I was gone left me feeling exposed, even violated. That nagging thought burrowed deeper. Maybe it wasn't an animal at all. Maybe it was something much more disturbing. Around 9 p.m., I tried to distract myself by poking at the fire and humming random tunes. My flashlight kept flickering in the darkness, and the trees stood like tall, silent witnesses to my growing anxiety. Every so often, I'd call out things like, "Anyone out there?" But there was never an answer, only the eerie echo of my own voice bouncing back. I couldn't decide which was worse, the idea of someone lurking in the shadows or the possibility of my own mind playing tricks on me. It's a scary feeling, not knowing whether your fear is justified or just a product of being alone and slightly spooked in an unfamiliar place. Maybe I should have left, but I convinced myself that bailing without a concrete reason would feel like I was losing to my own nerves. I sat back down by the fire and started thinking about my life back in Dallas, my cramped apartment, the mundane office job, and the daily grind that had driven me to seek solace in nature. Funny how all that stress seemed so insignificant compared to this moment. A coyote howled somewhere off in the distance, a lonely cry that echoed through the pines. Normally, that sound is kind of thrilling, reminding me of the raw beauty of the wild. But in that instant, it felt like an omen. I remember glancing up at the sky and noticing how the stars were hidden behind thick layers of clouds, as if even they didn't want to witness what was unfolding down here. My mind replayed every horror story I'd ever read, every scary campfire tale of hikers who vanished without a trace, every piece of disturbing folklore about creatures that dwell in dense forests. Just when I thought the night couldn't get any creepier, I heard the crunch of gravel somewhere behind me. It was subtle, like someone stepping lightly, trying not to be heard. My pulse leaped in my throat, and I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over the fire pit. Aiming my flashlight at the darkness, I saw nothing but shifting shadows among the trees. No eyes reflecting the beam, no clear silhouette, just a faint movement of branches as though someone had ducked behind them. My voice cracked when I shouted, "Who's there?" Again, no answer. The silence that followed was worse than any direct threat, because it left my imagination free to conjure all sorts of terrifying possibilities. I must have stood there for a good 2 minutes, paralyzed by a mix of curiosity and fear. Eventually, I forced myself to sit down, but my nerves were so on edge I could barely keep my hands steady. I decided if I was going to stay another night, I needed more than a flimsy flashlight and a pocket knife to feel safe. Digging through my truck, I found a tire iron and kept it within arm's reach. It's not a baseball bat, but at least it was solid enough to swing if somebody tried something. I also rigged a small bell on a piece of string around the campsite perimeter, kind of an improvised alarm system. It was more a desperate attempt to calm my nerves than anything else, but I hoped that if someone came snooping again, the bell would jingle and give me a warning. Deep down, I knew I was probably being overly cautious, but every fiber of my being screamed that this wasn't just a normal camping trip anymore. There was something undeniably off, something scary that kept me on high alert. By midnight, the wind picked up, rustling the pines in a relentless whisper that masked smaller sounds. I sat by the diminishing fire, hugging my knees, trying to parse out whether each noise was just a branch swaying or a footstep inching closer. The sense of isolation was almost overpowering. In a city, there's always a neighbor, a passing car, or a streetlight to give you a baseline of security. But out here, all I had was myself and the flickering circle of firelight. The forest felt vast and empty, yet simultaneously filled with hidden eyes. My mind kept racing through all the decisions I'd made that led me to this moment. From choosing this campsite to ignoring the pit in my stomach when things started feeling disturbing. Still, leaving at this hour felt like a gamble. A part of me feared that if I tried to drive away now, I'd see something or someone in my rearview mirror, or worse, find out my truck wouldn't start at the worst possible time. Eventually, the fire burned down to glowing embers, and the night air turned colder than I expected for a Houston forest. I zipped up my jacket, gathered my courage, and slipped inside my tent, placing the tire iron and flashlight next to me. The tent felt too thin, like a fragile wall separating me from a world of unknown dangers. Every brush of the wind against the nylon made me jump. My plan was to stay awake until dawn, but exhaustion weighed on my eyelids. In that hazy space between wakefulness and sleep, I swore I heard what sounded like hushed voices again, just beyond the tree line. They were too faint to make out any words, but the tone was urgent, almost conspiratorial. My blood ran cold. I held my breath, straining to catch any hint of who might be out there, but the voices faded into the wind, leaving behind a sickening blend of dread and confusion. I realized in that moment, this was just the start of the problems I'd face in these woods. Something was beginning to escalate, and I was stuck in the middle, unsure of whether I should trust my instinct and get the hell out, or keep pushing on to uncover what was really happening around me. It was almost dawn when I finally dozed off, but the sleep I got was shallow and filled with unsettling dreams. I woke up to a grayish light creeping into the tent, feeling stiff and exhausted. My throat was dry, and my mind was stuck on replaying those faint voices I'd heard. Were they real, or just my imagination playing tricks on me? Either way, it was a scary thought. Stepping out into the damp morning air, I noticed the bell I'd set up hadn't moved, and the fire was nothing but ashes. It was so quiet that even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. I had the strangest feeling that the silence itself was some kind of warning. Trying to snap out of it, I decided on a quick hike to clear my head, maybe catch a glimpse of something to confirm or deny my suspicions. I set off along a winding trail that skirted the edge of a small ravine. The morning haze clung to the trees, giving the forest a ghostly vibe. After walking a few minutes, I stumbled upon something that made my stomach churn. Footprints in the soft dirt, larger than mine. They weren't fresh, maybe a day or so old, but they definitely didn't belong to me. I knelt down and tried to follow them, but they led off into dense brush, leaving me with more questions than answers. Part of me wanted to keep tracking them, but a deeper instinct whispered that I should leave well enough alone. On my way back to the campsite, the tension only built. Every snapped twig under my feet felt amplified. Each rustle of leaves behind me made my heart pound. Eventually, I reached my tent to find things just as I left them. Tent closed, my truck untouched, gear in place. Yet that disturbing sense of being watched lingered, like a constant shadow at my back. I fired up a quick breakfast on my little grill, but barely tasted any of it. My appetite was overshadowed by the worry lodged in my gut. Maybe these woods weren't just messing with me. Maybe someone else was out here, and they didn't want me around. Around midday, I decided to explore a nearby clearing that some online maps labeled as a scenic spot. The air felt warmer, almost stifling, as I made my way through the thick pines. I kept an eye on my phone for any hint of signal. No luck. A deep sense of unease followed every step, and for the first time, I regretted coming alone. The clearing itself looked peaceful enough. Tall grass swaying in a gentle breeze, a couple of fallen logs that looked perfect for a picnic spot. But the scene was spoiled by my creeping paranoia. I sat on one of those logs and tried to calm down, telling myself I was just scaring my own shadow. Then something cracked behind me, a sharp, unmistakable crack of a branch. I spun around, pulse kicking into overdrive, but only caught a fleeting glimpse of movement near the tree before it vanished. That was it. My patience snapped. I bolted back toward the campsite, half expecting to be chased, though I never heard footsteps behind me. By the time I reached my tent, sweat trickled down my forehead, and my mind was buzzing with terror. I threw my gear into the truck in a frenzy. My plan: get out of White Oak Bend for a few hours, maybe find a small motel in Houston where I could at least get a hot shower and a moment of clarity. But as I turned the key in the ignition, the engine coughed and sputtered like it was choking on air. My stomach dropped. 2 more tries, same result. It was like some disturbing twist of fate wanted me stuck right there. A wave of panic hit me, but I refused to let fear paralyze me. Maybe it was bad gas. Maybe the battery was acting up. Either way, I needed to keep calm. I checked the engine's basics, but nothing obvious was wrong. Fuel gauge was fine. Battery terminals looked okay. My truck had never given me trouble before, and this couldn't have happened at a worse time. Every horror story I'd read about campers trapped in creepy, isolated places raced through my head. This was not how I imagined my weekend going. The day dragged on with me trying different fixes, calling roadside assistance, fiddling with wires, but the phone's signal was non-existent. The truck simply wouldn't start, and I had no clue why. By late afternoon, the sun was sinking fast, and the forest was slipping back into that unnerving hush. I thought about packing up and starting to walk toward the highway, but it was miles away, and night was closing in. My only option, or so it seemed, was to try to survive another evening, barricaded in a flimsy tent, hoping that the footsteps and whispers wouldn't return. But deep in my heart, I knew this night was going to be different. The threat had made itself known, and it felt like something was about to break loose. I steeled myself as dusk arrived, convinced that if something truly scary came knocking, I'd fight back. Anxiety had locked my thoughts on a single loop. What or who was out there, and why were they toying with me? I wasn't sure if I was up against a person, an animal, or just my own overactive imagination. But I sensed that my real problems were only just beginning. By the time darkness swallowed the campsite, every muscle in my body was tensed for a confrontation I wasn't certain I could handle. If there was a line between fear and survival mode, I was standing right on it, teetering, waiting for the night to decide my fate. I holed up in my tent, listening intently as the wind rustled the pine needles overhead. The fading light painted the sky in streaks of purple and gray, and my truck sat there like a useless hunk of metal, refusing to start. Everything in me screamed to run, but where would I go on foot, especially with night fast approaching? My improvised alarm bell clung to the edge of the site like a flimsy guardian, offering little real comfort. The memory of those footprints, and that glimpse of movement near the clearing, kept looping in my head, a disturbing reminder that I wasn't alone out here. I tried to calm my nerves by building another fire. Gathering dry wood and twigs, I set them ablaze and watched as the flames danced and crackled against the growing darkness. The glow pushed back at the creeping shadows, but only just. It felt like I was standing at the edge of 2 worlds, one illuminated by firelight, the other swallowed by a scary void. I kept listening for any snap of a twig or hushed whisper. My own heartbeat thudded in my ears, making it harder to separate real noises from my anxious imagination. A couple of hours into the night, I got my first undeniable sign that something was closing in. The bell I'd tied to the string let out a soft jingle, faint but unmistakable. My spine went rigid, every hair on my neck standing on end. Clutching my flashlight and the tire iron, I stepped toward the sound. The forest pressed in from all sides, thick with shadows and the echoes of rustling branches. I called out, "Who's there?" and got nothing but the echo of my own shaky voice. Then the bell jingled again, more forceful this time, like someone was giving it a deliberate tug. Just when I thought I'd catch whoever was messing with me, the string snapped. I heard it slither through the underbrush, then dead silence. My flashlight revealed the loose end of the bell lying on the ground, but no sign of who or what had yanked it. A wave of cold dread washed over me. It felt like an invisible game of cat and mouse, but I couldn't tell which role I was playing. My mind spun wild scenarios. Maybe a group of people had decided to terrorize random campers. Or maybe it was a single deranged individual getting a thrill out of tormenting me. I backed away slowly, refusing to turn my back on the tree line until I was safely next to the fire again. That was when the real terror began. From somewhere deeper in the woods, I heard a low, guttural noise. Half snarl, half moan. Too human to be an animal, but too feral to be a person. My chest constricted, and my blood ran cold. Instinctively, I huddled closer to the flames, as if they could form some magical barrier between me and that disturbing sound. It didn't come again, but my nerves were shot. The forest around me felt alive with menace, and every shadow seemed to breathe. I wanted to call for help, but who was going to hear me out here with no phone signal and no nearby campers? I can't say how long I stood there, heart pounding, gripped by indecision. Eventually, I realized that staying by the fire all night would leave me exposed. I needed some form of cover, so I slid into my tent, clutching the tire iron like my life depended on it, keeping the flashlight on as I huddled in the corner. My ears strained for any hint that someone, or something, was lurking just outside. The world felt infinitely large and terrifying, a place where every snapping twig sent a jolt of fear through my body. And I knew, without a doubt, that come morning, I'd have to face a choice. Either risk a long trek on foot for help or confront the fact that whatever was out here wasn't done with me yet. That entire night, I barely slept, dozing off in short, jittery intervals. I kept dreaming I was surrounded by thick pine trees that seemed to twist and reach for me, their branches forming distorted faces in the moonlight. I'd jolt awake with my heart hammering, clutching the tire iron and flashlight like my lifeline. By early morning, I made up my mind. I couldn't sit there and wait for some unseen terror to strike again. The campsite was now a prison, and my broken-down truck felt like a cruel joke. Leaving on foot was a huge risk, but I decided to gather the essentials: water, a small first aid kit, a few snacks, and start heading toward the main road. If I could flag down a passing car or find a gas station, maybe I'd stand a chance. The first couple hours of walking were uneventful, which almost made things worse because my mind spun in a constant loop of disturbing scenarios. I kept scanning the trail behind me, imagining that guttural sound creeping up from the shadows. Every rustle in the brush set my nerves on edge. My plan was to follow a dirt track that appeared on my offline maps, supposedly leading back to a more traveled route. The air grew muggy, and sweat clung to my skin, but I pressed on, determined not to lose my nerve. Each time I paused to catch my breath, I couldn't help feeling like eyes were on me from somewhere in that endless forest. After a while, I noticed random debris scattered on the path: torn pieces of clothing, an old, busted lantern, even a single, muddy hiking boot. My stomach twisted into knots. These items weren't new, but they sure didn't belong in a neat pile on a remote trail. It felt like the forest was dropping breadcrumbs I didn't want to follow. Yet part of me needed answers. Were these forgotten leftovers from careless campers, or were they signs of something far more scary? I picked up the lantern out of morbid curiosity, noticing deep scratches along its metal surface. That was enough to make me toss it aside, pulse racing again. Whatever had happened here, it wasn't anything good. As I continued, the trees started to thin, letting in more light. Relief flickered inside me. If the forest opened up, maybe I'd reach the main road soon. But just as my hopes surged, I heard that chilling noise again, a half-human snarl that echoed through the pines. My blood went cold, and I froze, trying to pinpoint the direction. It was off to my left, not too far. I fumbled for my pocket knife, but my hands shook so bad I could barely hold it steady. I remember whispering, "Keep it together, Morgan," even though I was close to panic. And then I saw it, a figure darting between the trees, too swift to make out clearly, but clearly not an animal. My heart practically stopped. I bolted. Logic and calm thinking vanished, replaced by raw survival instincts. My boots pounded the dirt as I sprinted down the trail, ignoring the throbbing ache in my legs. Branches slapped my shoulders, leaves crunched beneath me, and adrenaline overshadowed everything else. I could sense movement behind me, a flash of something in my peripheral vision. Every so often, I'd glance back, only to catch more flickers of that shape weaving through the undergrowth. It was definitely human-like, but the way it moved was off, almost feral. A terrifying thought popped into my head. What if it was a person who'd completely lost their mind out here? In a desperate move, I veered off the path, hoping to lose whoever, or whatever, it was. Bursting through thorny bushes and tall grass, I ignored the scrapes and scratches I got along the way. My lungs burned, and the stifling heat made me dizzy, but I refused to stop. At some point, I slid down a small embankment and landed in a shallow, muddy ditch. That's when a sharp pain ripped through my ankle, and I collapsed with a guttural cry. The adrenaline spiked as I tried to stand, but the world spun, and my ankle gave out. My mind screamed at me to keep moving, but my body wasn't cooperating. Scrambling backward, I felt trapped, a wounded animal in plain sight. That's when I realized I was out of options. I tried to catch my breath, bracing for the final confrontation. The trees around me stood tall and silent, like a grim audience waiting for a deadly finale. My vision blurred, and everything seemed to slow down. The forest that had once felt eerily empty now felt suffocating, crammed with menace. I'm not even sure how long I stayed there, trembling in the mud, waiting. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and time became a blur. Eventually, I heard rustling nearby, then quiet. It was as if the threat was right there, watching, deciding my fate. It's strange how fear can push you beyond your limits. Despite the pain, I forced myself onto my feet, leaning on a broken branch I found in the ditch. No way was I giving up. Hobbling as fast as I could, I made it across a final stretch of brush, emerging onto a narrow, cracked road. Relief and terror slammed into me at once. I was out of the deep woods, but I was also exposed, limping and barely able to defend myself. I staggered forward, searching for any sign of passing cars, praying someone would come along before my stamina gave out. The big question still gnawed at me. What was out there, and why was it playing this horrifying game of chase? I sensed I'd never truly get the answers, at least not the kind that make sense in a rational world. And as I reached that lonely stretch of asphalt with my ankle throbbing and my breath ragged, I wondered if I'd just escaped one nightmare, only to walk straight into another.